My brother Preston thought he was evicting his failure of a sister from a dusty Nevada wasteland. He demanded $800,000, unaware that the surveyor had just found a fortune beneath the dirt, or that the rusted containers behind me held serums worth more than gold. At 9 in the morning, Preston came for a fight, but he learned a brutal lesson about digging a grave for a wolf sleeping in her own den. My name is Ariel Winslow, and I was exactly 45 minutes into my morning protocol when the silence of the desert was murdered. At 6 in the morning, the Red Rock district of Nevada was not just quiet, it was a vacuum. The sun had not yet breached the jagged teeth of the eastern ridge, leaving the valley floor bathed in a bruised purple twilight. I liked this time best. It was the only hour when the temperature was manageable, hovering around 70 degrees before the sun turned the sand into a convection oven. I was inside Unit 4, a corrugated steel shipping container that had once traveled the Pacific Ocean carrying cheap electronics, but now sat rusting on concrete blocks in the middle of nowhere. To the rare passerby on the distant highway, my property looked like a scar on the landscape. It was a collection of sun-bleached metal boxes, heaps of scrap iron, and a perimeter fence topped with razor wire that screamed paranoia and poverty. That was the point. I was wearing a canvas hazmat suit that had seen better decades. It was stained with grease and the yellowish residue of nutrient paste. My gloves were thick rubber, reaching up to my elbows, and I held a pair of long steel tongs. Inside the glass tank in front of me, a bark scorpion the size of my hand skittered aggressively against the pane. Most people saw a pest. I saw a walking goldmine of peptides. But to maintain the illusion, I had to play the part of the eccentric, failing hermit, the snake lady of Red Rock. The sound that broke my concentration was not the wind or the hiss of the hydraulic door seals. It was the crunch of tires on gravel. I did not look up immediately. I finished transferring the scorpion to the extraction chamber, logged the weight on a clipboard using a pencil, because ink faded too fast out here, and then slowly peeled off my gloves. The vehicle outside had a heavy, expensive engine. It purred with a low frequency that vibrated in the soles of my boots. I knew that sound. It was the sound of money that had never known hard labor. I walked out of Unit 4 and into the central yard. The dust was still settling around a silver Mercedes G-Wagon that looked violently out of place against the backdrop of sagebrush and red dirt. The car was spotless. It gleamed like a mirror, reflecting the dilapidated state of my home back at me. The driver's door opened, and Preston Winslow stepped out. My half-brother had not changed much in the 5 years since I had left New York. He was still handsome in a way that suggested he spent more time in a dermatologist's chair than in the sun. He wore a navy blue Italian suit that probably cost $5,000. Utterly ridiculous for the desert heat. His shoes were polished leather, and I watched with a dry sense of amusement as he took his first step and immediately coated them in a layer of fine red dust. The passenger door opened, and Linda emerged, my stepmother. She looked like she was attending a funeral for someone she did not particularly like. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, oversized sunglasses, and a dress that was too formal for breakfast and too flimsy for Nevada. She held a handkerchief over her nose, her eyes darting around the yard as if expecting a swarm of locusts to descend upon her. They did not knock. There was no front door to knock on. Really, just the main sliding gate of the converted hangar I used as a living space and kitchen. Preston marched toward it, confident, entitled, moving with the aggressive cadence of a man who believed he owned every room he walked into. I intercepted them at the entrance. I did not say hello. I just stood there in my stained canvas suit, smelling of ozone and reptile musk, blocking their path. "You are trespassing," I said. My voice was raspy from the dry air. Preston stopped. He looked me up and down, his lip curling in a mixture of pity and disgust. "Hello to you too, Ariel," Preston said. His voice was smooth, practiced. It was the voice he used when he was pitching a bad investment to a gullible client. "We are not trespassing. We are inspecting family assets." "This is not a family asset," I replied. "This is my farm. Get out." "Farm," Linda choked out the word from behind her handkerchief. She stepped up beside Preston, looking at the rusted siding of the hangar. Good Lord, Preston, look at this. It is a junkyard. It smells like death and sulfur. I told you she was living like an animal. It is a reptile sanctuary, Linda, I said, keeping my face blank. And the smell is sulfur. It keeps the rattlesnakes away from the house, usually. Linda took a sharp step back, nearly tripping over her own heels. Preston ignored the comment. He pushed past me, his shoulder brushing against my dirty suit. He grimaced, brushing off his jacket as if I were contagious, and walked into the hangar. We are doing this inside, Preston announced. It is already 80 degrees out here. I followed them in. My living space was deliberately sparse. A metal table, 2 mismatched chairs, a cot in the corner, and a wall of terrariums housing various lizards and arachnids. The air inside was cooler, thanks to the industrial AC unit humming in the back, but it was stark. No photos, no decorations, just function. Preston threw a thick leather briefcase onto the metal table. The sound echoed in the empty room. He clicked the latches open and pulled out a stack of documents stapled together with blue legal backing. He slapped them down on the table. It is over, Ariel, Preston said. He remained standing, looming over the table to maximize his height advantage. We are done playing games. I drove 3 hours from Las Vegas not to catch up, but to settle accounts. I walked over to the hot plate where a pot of coffee was sitting. I poured myself a cup. I did not offer them any. I took a sip, letting the bitter black liquid burn my throat before I turned to face him. What accounts? I asked. The family debt, Preston said. He tapped a manicured finger on the stack of papers. Dad's estate has finally been reconciled. It turns out your little exodus to the desert 5 years ago was not just an act of rebellion, it was an act of theft. I stared at him. I bought this land with the money Grandma left me. Dad did not give me a dime. That is not what the forensic accountants found. Preston lied. He lied easily, breathing the falsehoods as naturally as oxygen. We found a promissory note. Dad loaned you $800,000 to set up this, whatever this is, a loan. Ariel, not a gift. And since the estate is currently facing liquidity issues, we are calling in the debt. $800,000, I repeated. The number was absurd. This land had cost me $40,000. The equipment inside the hidden labs cost millions, yes. But Preston did not know about that. To him, I was looking at a pile of rust worth nothing. I never borrowed money from Dad. The signature says otherwise, Preston said. He flipped to the last page of the document and spun it around. I glanced at it. There was a signature there. Ariel Winslow. It looked remarkably like the way I signed my name when I was 22. Right down to the little heart I used to dot the I, a habit I had broken a decade ago. It was a clumsy forgery, likely scanned from an old birthday card. That is fake, I said calmly. It is legally binding, Preston snapped. And since I know you do not have $800,000 buried in these sand dunes, we are seizing the collateral. The collateral? I looked around the room. The land, Preston said, and the improvements, if you can call them that. Linda walked over to one of the terrariums and peered inside with horror. We are doing you a favor. Really, she said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. Look at you, Ariel. You are 32 years old. You look like a mechanic. You have wasted your life out here playing with bugs and dirt. You are an embarrassment to the Winslow name. Your father would be heartbroken if he could see this squalor. My father is dead, Linda, I said. And I doubt he cares about my laundry. Do not speak to her like that, Preston warned. He adjusted his tie, looking uncomfortable in the stark room. Here is the reality. Ariel, you are broke. You are squatting on a debt you cannot pay. I have a court order here granting a preliminary motion for asset liquidation. I took another sip of coffee. My pulse did not speed up. My hands did not shake. This infuriated him. He wanted tears. He wanted me to scream, to beg, to throw things. He wanted the drama that fueled his ego. My silence was a mirror reflecting his own desperation, and he hated it. "So you are kicking me out?" I asked. "We are evicting you," Preston corrected. "Today." "Today?" I raised an eyebrow. "You cannot evict someone in a day, even in Nevada." Preston smiled. It was a shark's smile, all teeth and dead eyes. "I can when the debtor is demonstrably negligent and destroying the value of the collateral." I filed an emergency motion. Judge Henderson agreed that allowing you to stay here another week would likely result in the property becoming a total loss. He checked his watch. A Rolex Daytona, gold, flashy. "It is now 6:30 in the morning," Preston said. "At 9 in the morning, exactly 2.5 hours from now, the county surveyor is arriving." "The surveyor?" I asked. "Why?" "To confirm the boundaries and sign off on the appraisal," Preston said. "I have arranged a fast-track auction. I already have a buyer lined up for the land." I leaned back against the counter. "Who buys a scrapyard in the middle of a drought zone?" "Waste Management Solutions," Preston said, puffing out his chest. "Turns out, this valley is perfect for industrial refuse. It is isolated, the soil is dry, and nobody lives here to complain about the smell. They are going to bulldoze this entire heap, the containers, the fences, your little bug collection, all of it. They are going to flatten it and turn it into a landfill." He stepped closer. Invading my personal space, I could smell his cologne. It smelled like cedar and arrogance. "They are offering just enough to cover the debt and the legal fees," Preston said softly. "You walk away with nothing. Ariel, 0. But you also walk away free. No lawsuits. No prison time for fraud. You get in your truck, you drive away, and you never come back." I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He was lying about the buyer. He was lying about the price. If he was selling it for a landfill, he was getting pennies. But if he was desperate enough to drive out here at dawn to bully me, he needed cash, and he needed it immediately. "A landfill," I said. "You want to turn Dad's legacy into a garbage dump?" "This place is already a garbage dump," Linda shouted from across the room. She was fanning herself with a legal envelope. "We are just making it official. Honestly, Ariel, you should thank Preston. He is cleaning up your mess." "The surveyor comes at 9, I said, checking the old analog clock on the wall. 9 sharp, Preston said. "And do not try anything stupid. Do not try to hide assets. Do not try to lock the gates. This man works for the county. He is by the book. He is going to walk the property, stamp the valuation, and then I am handing the deed over to the new owners." He turned and walked back to the table, snapping his briefcase shut. "You have 2 hours to pack your personal effects," Preston said. "Anything left behind belongs to the creditors. I suggest you start with the clothes on your back. You look ridiculous." I finished my coffee. I set the mug down on the metal counter with a deliberate, soft click. "Okay," I said. Preston blinked. He had expected a fight. "Okay." "If the court ordered it," I said, shrugging. "I guess I have no choice. I will go pack." Preston narrowed his eyes. He scanned my face, looking for the trap. But I gave him nothing, just the flat, dull resignation of a woman beaten down by the desert. "Good," he said, though he sounded disappointed. "At least you are finally showing some pragmatism. Stay out of the way until the surveyor gets here. And keep those things." He gestured vaguely at the wall of terrariums. "In their cages. If one of them gets loose, I will sue you for reckless endangerment. They are nocturnal." "Preston," I said. "They are sleeping, just like everything else around here." I turned and walked toward the back of the hangar, toward the heavy steel door that led to the storage area. "Where are you going?" Linda demanded. "To pack," I said without looking back. "Unless you want to help me fold my underwear." Linda huffed and turned away. Preston watched me go, his eyes burning into my back. He thought he was the predator here. He thought he had cornered a helpless animal in a rusty cage. He had no idea that he had just walked into the mouth of a machine he could not even comprehend. I opened the heavy steel door and stepped into the darkness of the corridor connecting the units. I closed the door behind me, locking it with a heavy mechanical thud. The moment the lock clicked, my posture changed, the slump in my shoulders vanished. The dull look in my eyes sharpened into cold precision. I walked down the corridor, the red emergency lights guiding my way. I was not going to pack clothes. I was going to the comms room. Preston wanted a surveyor. He wanted an appraisal. He wanted to know what this land was worth. Fine, I whispered to the empty corridor. I will show. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind me, engaging the magnetic locks with a thud that felt less like security and more like a separation of worlds. On one side lay the dusty, humid reality of the hangar, where my half-brother and stepmother were currently suffocating in their own pretension. On this side, the air was scrubbed clean, filtered through 3 layers of HEPA purifiers and cooled to a crisp 68 degrees. I stripped off the canvas hazmat suit, hanging it on the decontamination rack, and walked toward the command console at the far end of the corridor. 5 years ago, the exit from my old life had been less precise. I remember standing in the foyer of the Winslow penthouse on the Upper East Side. It was Christmas Eve, a holiday my family celebrated not with warmth, but with an aggressive display of wealth. The tree was 12 feet tall, decorated by a professional designer in shades of silver and ice blue. It was beautiful and utterly soulless. I had just announced my purchase of the property in Red Rock. I had used the entirety of the inheritance my grandmother, my mother's mother, had left me. It was money that Linda could not touch. Money that existed outside the Winslow Trust, and spending it on a patch of desolate Nevada scrubland was, in their eyes, an act of mental instability. "You bought a sandbox," Preston had laughed, swirling a glass of single malt scotch that cost more than my first car. He was 27 then, already grooming himself to be the next titan of industry, though his only real talent was spending money he had not earned. "Ariel, seriously, you are going to go out there and do what grow cactus dig holes." "I am going to work," I had replied, clutching the deed in my hand like a shield. "It is a quarter-life crisis," Linda had sighed, adjusting a diamond brooch that looked like a frozen spider on her lapel. "Let her go. Preston, when she runs out of money and her skin turns to leather from the sun, she will come crawling back. They always do." They were wrong. I did not crawl back. But standing there in the cool blue light of my server room, I realized they were right about one thing. I had dug holes. I had just dug them deeper and smarter than they could ever imagine. I sat down at the workstation and woke the monitors. The screens flickered to life, displaying a grid of camera feeds covering every inch of the compound, including the interior of the hangar I had just left. I watched Preston on the screen. He was pacing the length of the metal table, checking his phone every 30 seconds. Linda was wiping the seat of a metal chair with a wet wipe she had pulled from her purse, her face twisted in a permanent grimace of distaste. I zoomed in on Preston. High definition was a cruel mistress. It revealed the things the naked eye missed. There were dark circles under his eyes that concealer could not quite hide. His cuticles were chewed raw, and that leg shake, it was a tremor of pure, unadulterated panic. Preston Winslow was not here as the conquering hero. He was here as a fugitive running from his own mistakes. I opened a new window on the screen and pulled up a background check I had run on him 6 months ago, updating it with real-time financial data. The picture it painted was pathetic. Preston liked to call himself a venture capitalist, but in reality, he was a gambler who had mistaken luck for skill. He had leveraged his position in the family trust to back a series of high-risk crypto schemes and offshore real estate developments that had imploded spectacularly last quarter. The numbers on my screen were red, violent red. He owed $3 million to a private equity group in Chicago that was known for breaking kneecaps rather than filing lawsuits. He had floated check after check, robbing Peter to pay Paul, and now the music had stopped. He needed liquid assets, and he needed them yesterday. That explained the rush. That explained the emergency court order. He did not care about the family legacy. He was trying to liquidate my home to save his own skin before the sharks came to collect. I minimized his financial autopsy and pulled up the scan of the document he had slammed on the table. The promissory note. I studied the signature on the screen. Ariel Winslow. It was a good forgery to the untrained eye, but to me, it was a ghost. I zoomed in on the curvature of the W. There was a slight hesitation in the upstroke, a micro tremor that did not belong to a pen moving across paper. It belonged to a scanner bar moving across a stationary image. I closed my eyes, and the memory hit me with the scent of vanilla cake and old paper. My 21st birthday. Dad had been sick then, his formidable strength whittled away by the cancer that Linda pretended was just fatigue. I had written him a card. I had poured my heart into it, thanking him for the microscope he had given me when I was 10, for the trips to the Natural History Museum, for being the only person in that house who looked at a rock and saw a story instead of a paperweight. I had signed it with a flourish, dotting the I with a small, silly heart because I knew it made him smile. Preston had scanned that card. He had lifted the signature from the last expression of love I had given our father and pasted it onto a lie designed to destroy me. Rage is usually hot. It burns and consumes. But this rage was cold. It was the temperature of liquid nitrogen. It clarified things. It stripped away any lingering biological loyalty I might have felt for the man pacing in my hangar. I looked at the date on the forged document. It was dated 5 years ago. The month I moved here. God, those first months had been brutal. The silence of the desert was not peaceful back then. It was predatory. The heat was a physical weight that pressed down on my lungs. I remembered lying on the floor of the shipping container, covered in sweat, watching a scorpion crawl across the ceiling and wondering if I had made a fatal mistake. I had failed to grow anything. The soil was too alkaline. The water table was too deep. My equipment kept overheating. I spent days without speaking to another human being, my voice atrophying in my throat until I sounded like the wind scraping over stone. But I had stayed, not out of stubbornness, but because of the letters. Dad had been a geologist before he was a CEO. He loved the earth. He understood its language. But he had married Linda, and Linda loved the skyline, not the horizon. She had slowly, methodically stripped him of his passion, turning him into a corporate figurehead who spent his days in boardrooms instead of field camps. But he had kept his secrets. When he died, his will was a standard, sterile document that left everything to Linda and the trust, but he had left a safety deposit box for me, containing only a stack of letters and a geological survey map from 1972. My dearest Ariel. One letter read, the handwriting shaky but distinct. They look at the surface and see dust. They do not know how to look down. I could never go back to Red Rock. Linda would never allow it. But the data is there. The seismic shifts in the 70s push something up from the mantle. It is not just rocks, sweet girl. It is the future. If you are reading this, I am gone, and they will try to take everything. Go to Red Rock, dig deep, and when you find it, do not sell it. Build on it. I had followed his instructions. I had bought the land. I had hired a private drilling crew, swearing them to secrecy with non-disclosure agreements that would ruin them if they talked. We had drilled past the water table, past the bedrock, into a strata that should not have existed this close to the surface. We found the tellurium vein. Yes, that was the gold the surveyor would find today. But we found something else, something Dad had only suspected. We found a unique microbial ecosystem thriving in the deep earth fissures, bacteria that metabolized heavy metals and secreted enzymes capable of breaking down complex polymers. That was the real treasure. That was why I had built the lab. I wasn't just farming. I was harvesting the most efficient biological recycling engine on the planet. I looked back at the screen. Preston had stopped pacing. He was staring at one of my terrariums, tapping the glass aggressively to wake up the Gila monster inside. "Idiot," I whispered. I reached for the secure phone on the console. It was a heavy, ruggedized satellite unit. I punched in a number that did not exist in any public directory. It rang once. "Winslow," a voice answered. It was deep, gravelly, and sounded like it had been cured in tobacco smoke. "Silas," I said. Silas Vance was not a normal lawyer. You did not find him on billboards or bus benches. He was the kind of attorney retained by defense contractors in sovereign states when they needed problems to vanish legally. I had met him 3 years ago when a biotech rival tried to fly a drone over my property. Silas had grounded the drone with a court order before it could even land to recharge. "I assume the guests have arrived," Silas said. He did not waste time with pleasantries. "They are in the hangar," I said. "Preston and Linda. They brought a forged promissory note claiming an $800,000 debt to the estate. They have an emergency eviction order." "800,000, Silas mused. "That is insulting. Your patent portfolio alone generated $4 million last quarter." "They do not know about the patents," I reminded him. "They think I am farming lizards. And the forgery, it is a scan from a birthday card I gave Dad. The pixelation is obvious if you look for it." "Lazy," Silas said. "I like lazy opponents. It makes the paperwork easier. Are we initiating Protocol A or B?" Protocol A was the shield block the eviction, prove the forgery, and tie Preston up in litigation for a decade. It was safe. It was sensible. "Protocol B," I said. There was a pause on the line. I could hear the faint scratch of a fountain pen on paper. Protocol B was the sword. It was the trap. It involved letting them think they had won, letting them overextend, and then snapping the jaws shut when they were too deep to escape. "You are sure?" Silas asked. "Protocol B exposes the asset. Once we play this card, you cannot go back to being the hermit in the desert. The world will know what is under that sand." "They are going to find out anyway," I said, looking at the time. Preston brought the county surveyor. "He wants a valuation." "Ah," Silas said. The amusement in his voice was dry and sharp. He brought a shovel to a minefield. "Excellent. I am en route. I have the Orion Pharma contract in the briefcase, and I am bringing the federal liaisons. ETA 40 minutes. Make it 30, I said. The surveyor arrives at 9. Hold the line. Ariel, Silas said. Do not interrupt him. Let him dig his own grave. We will just be there to fill it in." The line went dead. I sat there for a moment, listening to the hum of the servers. I looked at the surveillance feed one last time. Preston had taken out a handkerchief and was wiping the dust off his shoes, muttering something to Linda. He looked so small on the screen. He looked like a child playing dress-up in a world of adults. He had come here to strip me of my dignity. He wanted to see me broken, homeless, and begging for a scrap of the family fortune. He wanted to prove that without the Winslow name, I was nothing. I stood up and smoothed the front of my work shirt. I walked over to the mirror hanging on the back of the door. My face was bare, my skin tanned by the sun, my hair pulled back in a practical, messy bun. I did not look like a Winslow. I looked like the land, hard, weathered, enduring. I unlocked the safe beneath the console. Inside sat the real deed to the property, the mineral rights certification I had secured under a shell company 4 years ago, and the original birthday card Preston had stolen the signature from. I had found it in Dad's desk after the funeral and kept it, knowing that one day, Preston's greed would outweigh his intelligence. I took the documents and placed them in a battered rucksack. I did not need a briefcase. A rucksack fit the narrative. I walked back to the heavy steel door. I paused with my hand on the latch. "You want to sell the land, Preston," I said to the silence. "I will show you what this land really is." I opened the door and stepped back into the heat, ready to play the victim one last time. I passed through the second airlock, waiting for the hiss of the decontamination mist to settle before the biometric scanner read the retinas of my eyes. The heavy steel door slid open with a whisper of magnetic seals, revealing the world that Preston believed was nothing more than a rusted graveyard. If my brother had been capable of seeing past the surface, he would have realized that the shipping containers were not storage units. they were camouflage. I stepped onto the catwalk of Sector 4. The air here smelled different. It did not smell of dust or sulfur. It smelled of sterilized ozone and the sharp, metallic tang of liquid nitrogen. Below me, stretching down 3 subterranean levels into the cool earth of the Nevada basin, was a biosafety level 4 facility that rivaled anything the Centers for Disease Control operated in Atlanta. To the naked eye, the desert above was dead. Down here, life was being rewritten. I walked along the glass-walled observation deck, looking down at the venom extraction floor. Preston had mocked my bugs. He had laughed at the scorpions. He did not know that the Death Stalker scorpions in Unit 2 were genetically modified to produce chlorotoxin variants that bound specifically to glioblastoma cells. We were not just milking arachnids, we were manufacturing tumor paint, a compound that lit up brain cancer cells like Christmas lights under near-infrared imaging, allowing surgeons to remove tumors with molecular precision, but that was just the appetizer. I stopped at Station Alpha, inside a pressurized, climate-controlled habitat. A western diamondback rattlesnake lay coiled on a heated rock. It was massive, nearly 6 feet long, with scales that shimmered with an unnatural iridescence. This was specimen 89. I placed my hand on the thick polycarbonate glass. Specimen 89 raised its head, tasting the air. "Hello. Beautiful," I whispered. We were not harvesting specimen 89 for antivenom. That was pedestrian science. That was something you did in a roadside shack. We were harvesting a specific peptide sequence in its venom that caused rapid coagulation of blood. My team had synthesized a derivative of this peptide to create a battlefield wound sealant that stopped arterial bleeding in 12 seconds flat. It was a contract currently sitting on the desk of a general in the Pentagon, pending final field trials. And the iridescence. That was the side project. We had isolated the gene responsible for the snake's ability to modulate its thermal signature. We were synthesizing a bioorganic polymer that could be woven into fabric, effectively rendering a soldier invisible to thermal imaging drones. Preston thought I was selling snake oil. I was selling invisibility. I moved past the extraction zone to the central hub. The hum here was louder, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated in the marrow of my bones. It was the sound of 20 supercomputer server racks processing genomic sequences in real time. The cooling systems alone consumed enough power to light up a small city, which was why I had built a geothermal tap that drew energy directly from the heat of the mantle deep below the aquifer. The floor was a hive of activity. My staff moved with the synchronized efficiency of worker bees. There were 12 of them on this shift, all clad in pristine white Tyvek suits with full-face respirators. They were PhDs in biochemistry, molecular genetics, and toxicology. They did not look up as I walked by. They were too focused on the centrifuges spinning at 30,000 revolutions per minute, separating plasma from gold nanoparticle suspensions. I took the elevator down to level 3. This was the vault. This was where the real money grew. The air here was humid and thick. The walls were lined with vertical farming racks, but I was not growing lettuce or tomatoes. I was growing fungi, specifically Aspergillus niger, strain K44. I walked to the nearest incubation chamber. Inside, a gray, fuzzy mycelium was aggressively devouring a block of what looked like concrete. It was not concrete. It was a composite brick laced with lead, arsenic, and mercury industrial sludge solidified into a solid mass. "Status," I said, my voice amplified by the room's intercom. A technician named Marcus, a brilliant mycologist I had poached from MIT 3 years ago, stepped forward. He held a tablet in his gloved hands. "Metabolic rate is up 15%. Dr. Winslow," Marcus said. "The new enzyme bath is working. The colony has consumed 4 kilograms of toxic substrate in 6 hours. Heavy metal sequestration is at 99.8%. The byproduct is completely inert." I nodded, feeling a thrill that no amount of money could buy. This was the Project Midas. The Department of Defense had millions of acres of soil contaminated by decades of weapons testing and chemical spills. Cleaning it up the traditional way cost billions and took centuries. My fungus could eat the poison and turn it into harmless organic matter in weeks. The contract for the pilot program alone was worth $40 million. The full rollout would make the Winslow Family Trust look like a piggy bank, and Preston wanted to bulldoze it to make a landfill. The irony was so sharp it almost cut. My tablet buzzed in my pocket, breaking my reverie. I pulled it out. It was a secure message on the encrypted channel. Sender Dr. Arthur Sterling, CEO, Orion Pharma. Message wheels down at the rendezvous point in 20 minutes. I hope the sample is ready. The board is eager to announce the acquisition of the exclusivity rights. I smiled. Sterling was early. Of course he was. When you are about to secure the patent for a cancer drug that could change the standard of care globally, you do not show up late. Doctor. Sterling was the only outsider who knew the full extent of what lay beneath the red rock dirt. He was a visionary, a man who respected science more than stock prices. Though he was very good at managing both. He was coming here to sign the final papers for the Venom project. I checked the time, 8:45. Preston's surveyor would be here in 15 minutes. Sterling would arrive shortly after. The timing was going to be tight, but chaos was just another variable to be managed. I walked to the secure records room at the back of level 3. I placed my hand on the biometric scanner. The heavy door clicked open. Inside, rows of hard drives stored the intellectual property of my empire, but I was not here for the digital data. I went to the physical safe in the corner. I spun the dial left to 10, right to 22, left to 6. The mechanism clunked, and the heavy iron door swung open. Inside lay the Preston file. I had started compiling it 2 years ago. When Silas first warned me that my brother was leveraging the family assets for high-risk loans, it was a thick binder. It contained every foreclosure notice on his properties, every lawsuit filed against his shell companies, and the forensic analysis of his gambling debts in Macau and Monaco. But next to it lay the Winslow Biosolutions Valuation Report. This was the document Preston should have asked for. This was the document that listed the assets he was trying to seize. Asset 1 intellectual property portfolio. Estimated value, $150 million. Asset 2 government contracts. Active and pending. Estimated value, $75 million. Asset 3. Physical infrastructure and geothermal power plant. Estimated value, $25 million. Total enterprise value, $250 million. And that was a conservative estimate, before the mineral rights were factored in. I pulled the binder out. It was heavy in my hands. This was the weapon. This was the hammer I could drop on Preston's head at any moment. I could walk out there right now, throw this on the table, and watch his heart stop. But that would be too easy. It would be a mercy kill. And after 5 years of silence, after 5 years of letting them call me a failure while I built the future in the dark, I was not in a merciful mood. I put the heavy binder back in the safe. I closed the door and spun the dial. I did not need the binder to destroy Preston. I just needed him to be himself. I looked around the room. On a shelf sat an old, scratched iPad. It was a relic from the early days of the lab. Its screen cracked in the corner. It looked like junk, but it was synced to the central control system. From this beat-up piece of glass, I could control the ventilation, the locks, the lighting, and the security feeds. I picked it up. It was perfect. To Preston, it would look like the desperate tool of a broke woman trying to manage a failing farm. To me, it was the keys to the kingdom. I tapped the screen. The feed from the surface popped up. A white county sedan was turning off the main highway onto my access road. The dust plume behind it rose high into the still morning air. The county surveyor. "Showtime," I whispered. I walked out of the secure room. Locking it behind me, I moved back toward the elevator, stripping off the persona of the CEO and slipping back into the role of the beleaguered sister. I loosened my hair, letting a few strands fall messily around my face. I rubbed a smudge of graphite grease onto my cheek. I ascended from the cool, humming womb of the laboratory back toward the harsh, blinding reality of the surface. As the elevator rose, I thought about the fungus eating the lead bricks below. It was a slow, patient process. It surrounded the toxic element, absorbed it, and neutralized it. Preston was the toxin, and today, I was going to neutralize him. The elevator doors opened into the corridor behind the steel door. I stepped out, clutching the cracked tablet to my chest. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the dry air of the desert, and pushed the door open. The heat hit me first, then the voice of my stepmother. "She is probably hiding in there crying," Linda was saying, "or packing her bags. Do you think she has any jewelry worth keeping? Her grandmother had that sapphire brooch." "Focus, Linda," Preston snapped. "The surveyor is here." I stepped into the hangar. Preston spun around, his eyes scanning me for the heavy binder or the box of valuables he expected. When he saw only the old tablet and my empty hands, a look of triumph washed over his face. "Time is up, Ariel," Preston said, checking his watch. "Mr. Elias Thorne just pulled in. I hope you are ready to hear the truth about what this dirt is really worth." I looked at him, and for a split second, I almost felt sorry for him. He had no idea that the truth was standing right in front of him, and it was worth a hell of a lot more than $800,000. "I am ready," I said. "Let us go see what he finds." The white sedan that rolled into the yard at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning was a Ford Crown Victoria that had stopped being manufactured a decade ago. It was covered in a layer of red dust so thick it looked like a geological formation on wheels. The county seal on the door was faded, peeling at the edges, a testament to the budget cuts that plagued rural Nevada administration. Preston Winslow smoothed the lapels of his navy suit, checking his reflection in the pristine window of his G-Wagon one last time. He looked like he was preparing for a board meeting, not a dirt inspection. Beside him, Linda was fanning herself with a folded legal pad, her face already glistening with a sheen of sweat that her expensive foundation could not contain. "Finally," Preston muttered, "let us get this over with so we can get back to civilization." The driver's door of the Ford creaked open with a groan of dry metal. Elias Thorne stepped out. If Preston was a polished marble statue, Elias was a piece of flint. He was a man in his late 60s, constructed entirely of angles and gristle. He wore a faded khaki vest over a plaid shirt, work boots that had seen more miles than Preston's car, and a baseball cap that simply read "Survey" in bold. White letters. He did not look at the people first. He looked at the ground. He kicked a loose rock with the toe of his boot, squinting at the horizon as if the mountains had personally offended him. "Mr. Thorne," Preston called out, putting on his best courtroom smile. He walked toward the surveyor with his hand extended. "Preston Winslow, I am the attorney representing the estate. We spoke on the phone." Elias looked at the extended hand, then at Preston's shoes, and finally at his face. He did not shake the hand. He reached into the back seat of his car and pulled out a heavy, bright orange tripod case. "I remember," Elias said. His voice sounded like gravel in a concrete mixer. "You are the one who called my office 4 times yesterday demanding a rush job." "Time is money, Mr. Thorne," Preston said, dropping his hand but keeping the smile plastered on. "And in this case, the lack of money is the issue. We are looking to expedite the liquidation. As I mentioned, we have a potential buyer interested in the parcel for waste management usage. We just need you to confirm the boundaries and sign off on the standard agricultural degradation value." Elias slammed the trunk shut. He adjusted his glasses, looking past Preston to where I was standing by the hangar door. "You the owner?" Elias asked. "I am Ariel," I said. I stayed where I was, leaning against the corrugated steel, holding a bottle of water. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne." "Morning," he grunted. He turned back to Preston. "And for the record, son, I do not sign off on values you dictate. I sign off on what I find. If I find a waste dump, I will value it as a waste dump. If I find the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, I will value it as a wonder of the world. The county pays me to be blind to everything but the dirt." Preston's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Of course, I simply meant that the property is clearly distressed. It is a non-operational farm in a drought zone. We are looking at a base land value assessment, probably $200 an acre, give or take. He let the number hang in the air, a subtle suggestion wrapped in a question. It was a lowball figure, the kind of valuation that would ensure his transfer taxes were minimal, and the sale to the landfill developers would look like a massive profit margin on his books. Elias ignored him. He hoisted the orange case onto his shoulder and picked up a black, ruggedized case in his other hand. "Let us walk the perimeter," Elias said. "It is going to be 100 degrees by noon. I want to be done before my boots melt." We began the procession. It was a ridiculous parade. Elias led the way, moving with a surprising speed for his age. I followed a few paces back, comfortable in my work boots. Preston trailed behind, trying to avoid stepping on cactus clumps, and Linda brought up the rear, complaining loudly about the heat and the swarm of gnats that had taken a liking to her perfume. "This is inhumane," Linda whined as we trudged past the row of shipping containers. "Why do we have to walk? Can we not just drive the perimeter?" "No roads," Elias said without turning around. "And I need to run the scanner." He stopped at the northern marker of the property. A rusted iron stake driven into the ground 50 years ago. He set down the black case and popped the latches. "What is that?" Preston asked, wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "Some kind of metal detector." "Ground-penetrating radar with seismic resonance," Elias said. He lifted the device out. It looked like a cross between a lawnmower and a satellite dish, mounted on 3 all-terrain wheels. "County just bought it. Supposed to map soil density and water tables down to 30 meters. Let us see if it works, or if it is just another overpriced toy from the tech boys in Silicon Valley." I tensed slightly. I knew about the GPR purchase. I had tracked the county procurement logs last month. It was the reason I had activated the perimeter dampening fields around the lab containers. The device would not be able to see inside the steel boxes. The lead lining I had installed for radiation shielding would look like solid rock to the scanner. But the land itself. The land was naked. Elias powered up the machine. It emitted a low-frequency hum that was barely audible. He pushed it forward, walking a straight line along the property edge. He held a tablet connected to the device, his eyes glued to the scrolling data stream. Preston walked beside him, practically hovering. "See?" Preston said, gesturing to the expanse of red dust and scrub brush. "Nothing but sand and bedrock. It is barely fit for lizards. The water table is shot. The soil alkaline is off the charts. It is a wasteland. Mr. Thorne, honestly, the $200 an acre estimate might be generous." "Quiet," Elias muttered. "I am just providing context." Preston pressed. "My sister has tried to cultivate this land for 5 years. Total failure. Ask her. She has not sold a single crop. The insolvency proves the lack of value." "I said quiet," Elias barked. He stopped the machine. He tapped the screen of his tablet, frowning. "That is odd." "What?" Preston asked, leaning in. "Did you find a buried tin can?" "Density shift," Elias said. "Massive spike in density. Right here." He pointed to the ground. To Preston. It looked like dirt. To me, it looked like the cap of the geological chimney my father had identified in his letters. "Probably an old septic tank," Preston scoffed. "Like I said, the place is a dump." Elias pushed the machine forward again. We were moving toward the rocky outcrop behind the main hangar. This was the dead zone, as the locals called it, a cluster of jagged red rocks that jutted out of the earth like broken fingers. As the scanner approached the rocks, the low hum changed. It began to oscillate, a rising and falling warble that sounded like a distressed wail. The graph on Elias's tablet went haywire. The lines, which had been flat and steady, began to spike violently, jagging up and down in red and orange peaks. "Whoa," Elias said, stopping the cart. "Look at that interference." "It is broken," Preston said, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "The heat is probably frying the circuits. Or maybe it is the magnetic interference from all that junk metal she has piled up. This is not magnetic interference, Elias said. He looked up, scanning the rocks. This is resonance. The sound waves are hitting something dense, something incredibly dense. He pushed the cart another 10 feet. The warble turned into a high-pitched whine. Stop it, Linda covered her ears. That noise is giving me a migraine. Preston, make him stop. Mr. Thorne, Preston said, his patience snapping. This is a waste of time. The machine is clearly malfunctioning. Can we just agree on the visual assessment? It is rock. It is dirt. It is worthless. Just write it down so we can leave. Elias ignored him completely. He shut off the GPR unit. The silence rushed back into the valley, heavy and ringing. I am not writing down anything until I know what is throwing that echo, Elias said. He walked back to his orange case and pulled out a portable core drill. It was a heavy gasoline-powered auger with a diamond-tipped bit. You have got to be kidding me, Preston groaned. You are going to dig a hole now. I am going to take a core sample, Elias said. He walked to the base of the rock formation, about 20 feet from where I was standing. 5 meters, standard procedure for anomalous density readings. I watched him set up the drill. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The dampeners hid the lab, but nothing could hide the geology. The tellurium vein ran shallow here. It was an uplift, a geological mistake that had pushed the rare element up from the mantle millions of years ago. Elias yanked the starter cord. The engine roared to life, a jagged mechanical scream that sent a flock of crows scattering from the nearby scrub. This is ridiculous, Preston shouted over the noise. You are drilling into granite. You are going to break your bit. Elias leaned his weight onto the handles. The diamond tip bit into the earth. Dust plumed up, red and choking. Linda coughed and retreated toward the car. But Preston stayed, mesmerized by his own annoyance. The drill went down fast for the first meter sand and loose shale. Then the tone of the engine changed. It deepened. It was grinding against something harder. 2 meters, 3 meters. It is just bedrock, Preston yelled. You are wasting gas. Elias did not stop. He was sweating now, his face grimed with red dust, but his eyes were locked on the depth gauge. At 4 meters, the drill shuddered violently. The sound changed again, not the grinding of stone, but a high-pitched screech of metal on metal. Hit a pipe, Preston shouted, throwing his hands up. Told you. It is a sewer line or an old water main. Congratulations. You just broke the plumbing. Elias killed the engine. The silence was sudden and absolute. That did not feel like a pipe, Elias said, breathing hard. He locked the extraction clutch and began to winch the core sample up. The long steel tube emerged from the earth slowly, covered in red mud. Preston stepped closer, ready to gloat over a tube full of rusty water or cracked PVC. Let us see the garbage, Preston sneered. Elias unlatched the bottom of the tube and slid the core sample out onto a portable tray. It was a cylinder of earth about 2 feet long. The top half was the standard red clay of Nevada, but the bottom half was not red. It was not gray. It was a dark, metallic silver, woven through with veins of a lustrous, heavy gold material that caught the brutal morning sun and threw it back with a blinding intensity. It did not look like rock. It looked like a solid bar of alloy that had been buried in the earth. The gold flecks were not scattered. They were dense, forming a lattice structure that held the silver-gray tellurium ore together. Preston stopped. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He blinked, looking from the tray to Elias, and back to the tray. What is that? Preston whispered. Is that pyrite fool's gold? Elias did not answer immediately. He took a bottle of water from his belt and poured it over the sample, washing away the outer layer of mud. The shine intensified. It was heavy. You could see the weight of it just by how it sat on the tray. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a jeweler's loupe. He bent down. bringing his face inches from the sample. He stayed there for a long time. The only sound was the wind hissing through the sagebrush and the distant hum of the ventilation fans from my hidden lab. Finally, Elias straightened up. He took the loop out of his eye. He looked at the sample. Then he looked at the massive rock formation rising behind us, realizing for the first time that the entire hill was likely composed of the same material. "That is not pyrite," Elias said. His voice was quiet, stripped of its earlier gruffness. He sounded shaken. "Pyrite is brittle, this is malleable, and that silver matrix, that is telluride." "Telluride?" Preston asked, the word feeling foreign in his mouth. "Gold and tellurium," Elias said. "One of the rarest bonding occurrences in nature. We used to see traces of this in the old Comstock lode. But nothing like this. This is high grade. Incredibly high grade." Preston's eyes widened. The gears in his head began to turn, grinding away the narrative of the landfill and replacing it with something else. Something darker. "Gold," Preston said, his voice trembling with a sudden, greedy hunger. "You found gold." Elias did not answer him. He slowly turned his head. He looked across the dusty yard, past the sweating lawyer, past the complaining stepmother, and locked eyes with me. His expression was one of profound shock. He was a man who had spent 40 years looking at dirt, and he knew exactly what he was seeing. He knew that a deposit this shallow, this rich, was a geological miracle, and he knew that I had been living on top of it for 5 years. He looked at my dirty boots. He looked at the junkyard behind me. And then he looked into my eyes, and the realization hit him. I wasn't failing. I was guarding. Elias opened his mouth to speak, to ask the question that was screaming in his mind. "Did you know?" I held his gaze. My face remained impassive. A mask of desert calm. I slowly, deliberately raised my right hand. I placed my index finger against my lips. "Shh." Elias froze. He looked at Preston, who was now crouching over the sample, poking it with a shaking finger, muttering the word "gold" over and over again like a prayer. Then he looked back at me. A flicker of understanding passed between us. It was the recognition of one professional to another. He closed his mouth. He nodded, a microscopic movement that only I could see. "What is it worth?" Preston demanded, standing up. "Mr. Thorne, give me a number. If this is gold, what is this land worth?" Elias looked at the sample, then at his clipboard. He took a pen from his pocket. His hand hesitated for a moment before he wrote something down. "I need to run a chemical assay to be sure," Elias said, his voice steady again. "But if this vein runs as deep as the scanner suggests, you are not looking at a landfill site, son." "How much?" Preston all but screamed. "Millions," Elias said. "Tens of millions, maybe more." Preston spun around to look at the property. He was no longer seeing a dump. He was seeing a kingdom, and in his eyes, I saw the exact moment the eviction turned into a hostile takeover. "Linda," Preston shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Get out of the car, you have to see this." As Preston ran toward his mother, tripping over his own expensive shoes in his haste to share the news of his imaginary fortune, Elias walked over to me. He wiped the red dust from his hands onto his pants. "You play a dangerous game, Miss Winslow," Elias murmured as he passed me. "High risk, high reward." "Mr. Thorne," I replied softly. "He is going to try to take it," Elias warned. "I know," I said, watching my brother dancing in the dust. "That is exactly what I'm counting on." Suddenly, a rhythmic thumping sound cut through the air. It started low, a vibration in the chest, and grew rapidly into a roar that drowned out Preston's shouts. We all looked up. Coming over the ridge, black and sleek against the blue sky, was a helicopter. It banked sharp, the downdraft kicking up a blinding cloud of red dust. Preston shielded his eyes. "Who is that?" "Is that the news?" "Did you call the news?" "No," I said. checking my watch. That is the paperwork. The Eurocopter EC-130 was a magnificent beast of a machine. It was painted a matte, void-like black that seemed to absorb the harsh Nevada sunlight rather than reflect it. As it descended, the rotor wash hit the ground with the force of a physical blow, the red dust, which had only just settled from Elias's drilling, was whipped into a blinding, choking frenzy. I pulled my scarf up over my nose and mouth, squinting against the grit. Beside me, Elias Thorne held onto his hat with one hand and shielded his eyes with the other. Watching the aircraft with the grim appreciation of a man who liked heavy machinery, my family, however, was less appreciative. Linda screamed. It was a high, thin sound that was almost immediately swallowed by the thrum of the turbine engine. She flailed her arms, trying to protect her hair, which was currently being dismantled by the wind. She looked like a scarecrow caught in a tornado. Preston did not scream. He froze. I watched him closely. His reaction was not annoyance. It was terror. His eyes went wide, and the color drained from his face, leaving him looking pasty and sick beneath his tan. He took a stumbling step backward, his gaze darting between the descending helicopter and the open desert road, as if calculating whether he could make a run for his car. "Is that the feds?" Preston shouted over the roar, grabbing my arm. His grip was painful. "Ariel, what did you do? Is that the FBI, or is it the Chicago group?" I looked at his hand on my arm, then up at his panicked face. "The Chicago group," I asked, raising my voice to be heard. "You mean the loan sharks you borrowed $3 million from?" He recoiled as if I had burned him. "Shut up. Just tell me who that is." "I do not know, Preston," I lied, my voice calm. "Maybe it is the buyer for your landfill." The helicopter touched down 50 yards away, its skids settling onto the hard-packed earth with a gentle thud. The engine whined down, the rotors slowing to a lazy chop. The dust cloud began to drift eastward, revealing the machine in all its sleek, menacing glory. The side door slid open. Preston straightened his jacket, trying to compose himself. If it was the police, he needed to look like a lawyer. If it was a creditor, he needed to look solvent. He wiped the sweat from his upper lip and assumed a posture of defensive authority. A bodyguard stepped out first. He was a mountain of a man wearing a black suit that fit him poorly across the shoulders, simply because his shoulders were too wide for standard tailoring. He scanned the perimeter, his eyes lingering on Elias's drill and then on Preston, dismissing them both as non-threats. He turned back to the cabin and offered a hand. "Doctor." Arthur Sterling stepped onto the desert floor. He was a man who made 70 look like the new 40. He wore a linen suit the color of oatmeal, perfectly tailored, with a silk pocket square that added a splash of crimson. He did not look like he belonged in a desert. He looked like he belonged on the deck of a yacht in the Mediterranean. He adjusted his sunglasses, took a deep breath of the hot air, and smiled. 2 assistants followed him, both carrying sleek aluminum briefcases handcuffed to their wrists. "Who is that?" Linda hissed, trying to pat her hair back into place. "He looks important." "I will handle this," Preston said. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by bluster. He marched forward to intercept them before they could reach the house. I stayed back, leaning against a crate, watching the collision of 2 very different worlds. "Excuse me," Preston shouted, holding up a hand like a traffic cop. He stepped directly into Sterling's path. "This is a restricted area. We are in the middle of a legal proceeding involving a foreclosure and asset seizure. You cannot just land a helicopter here without authorization." The bodyguard stepped forward, looming over Preston, but Sterling raised a hand, stopping him. The CEO lowered his sunglasses, looking at Preston with an expression of mild curiosity, as if he had found an interesting beetle on his lapel. "Foreclosure?" Sterling asked. His voice was a rich baritone, cultivated in the lecture halls of Cambridge and the boardrooms of Zurich. "That is fascinating. I was under the impression that this facility was one of the most solvent biotech startups on the West Coast." "Biotech," Preston laughed. It was a nervous, incredulous bark. Buddy, you are lost. This is a lizard farm, a failing lizard farm. I am the attorney for the estate, and I am telling you to vacate the premises. We are conducting a survey. Sterling looked at Preston's dusty shoes, then at his sweating face. He did not say a word to him. He simply stepped around him. It was a move of absolute power. He did not argue. He did not explain. He just rendered Preston irrelevant by ignoring his existence. Sterling walked straight toward me. His pace was brisk, purposeful. "Ariel," he called out, his arms spreading wide. "My apologies for the theatrics with the landing. The pilot insisted the wind shear near the ridge was too dangerous for a softer approach." Preston spun around, his mouth hanging open. "Wait, you know her." Sterling ignored him. He stopped in front of me and took my hand in both of his. His grip was warm and firm. "Doctor, Sterling," I said. "Welcome to Red Rock." "The sample. Ariel," Sterling said, his eyes shining with genuine excitement. "The B29 variant you sent to the Geneva lab last Tuesday, it is a masterpiece. Truly. My head of oncology called me at 3 a.m. weeping. He said the tumor markers did not just recede, they vanished. The binding affinity is off the charts." Behind us, the silence was deafening. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "I told you the peptide chain was stable," I said, allowing a small smile to touch my lips. "We tweaked the extraction protocol to minimize protein degradation." "Stable?" Sterling laughed. "It is bulletproof, which is why I am here personally. The board authorized the expedited acquisition of the exclusivity rights this morning." Preston walked up behind us. He looked like he had been hit in the head with a shovel. He looked at Sterling, then at me, then back at Sterling. "Exclusivity rights," Preston stammered. "For what? The poison?" Sterling finally turned to look at my brother. He removed his sunglasses completely, revealing eyes that were sharp and cold as flint. "You must be the brother," Sterling said. "Ariel mentioned she had family complications. I assumed she meant a sick aunt, not a nuisance." "I am not a nuisance," Preston bristled, though his voice lacked its usual force. "I am Preston Winslow. I am the executor of the estate that owns this land, and I want to know what is going on. Who are you?" "I am Arthur Sterling," he said, "CEO of Orion Pharmaceuticals." Linda gasped. She clutched her handbag to her chest. "Orion, the company that makes the anti-aging cream." "We do have a cosmetic division, yes," Sterling said, dismissing her with a glance. "But we are primarily focused on oncology and immunology, and your stepdaughter here is about to become our primary supplier for the next decade." He turned back to me. "I brought the contracts. Ariel, the $50 million initial licensing fee is ready for wire transfer upon signature. The royalty structure is set at 12% of gross sales. Just as you negotiated." "50 million," Preston whispered. The number seemed to physically stagger him. He grabbed the edge of a rusted shipping crate to steady himself. $50 million. For the first tranche, Sterling corrected. If the clinical trials proceed as projected, the milestone payments will triple that figure within 24 months. I watched Preston's face. The shock was fading, replaced by a dawning, terrible realization. He looked at the junk around him. He looked at the dirty hazmat suit I had just taken off. He looked at the failing farm he had come to seize for a paltry $800,000 debt. "You?" Preston pointed a shaking finger at me. "You have a $50 million contract." "I do not have it yet," I said. "I have to sign it first." "I would like to see the production line before we finalize," Sterling said. "I need to verify the biocontainment protocols for the FDA compliance report." "Of course," I said. "Right this way." I turned and walked toward the main hangar door. "Wait," Preston shouted. He scrambled after us. "I am coming too. As the property manager, I have a right to inspect any commercial activity on the premises." I stopped and looked at Sterling. He raised an eyebrow. "Let him come," I said. "He needs to see this." I led them to the heavy steel door at the back of the hangar, the one Preston had ignored earlier. the one he thought led to a broom closet or a storage room for lizard food. I punched in the 12-digit security code. The keypad beeped a happy confirming tone. The hydraulic locks disengaged with a heavy mechanical thunk that vibrated through the floor. I pulled the door open, a blast of cold. Sterile air rushed out, hitting us in the face. It smelled of ozone and progress. "After you." "Doctor. Sterling," I said. Sterling walked in. His assistants followed. Preston and Linda hesitated at the threshold. They peered into the darkness of the corridor, illuminated only by the strip of blue LED lights running along the floor. "Coming, Preston?" I asked. "Or is it too scary for you?" He gritted his teeth and stepped inside. Linda followed, clutching his arm. We walked down the corridor to the observation deck of Sector 4. The glass wall overlooked the main laboratory floor. When Preston stepped up to the glass, his breath fogged the pain. Below us, the facility was humming. The white floors gleamed under the high-intensity lights. The stainless steel bioreactors, each the size of a minivan, were churning quietly. Staff in full hazmat gear moved between the stations, carrying trays of vials that glowed with a faint bioluminescence. In the center of the room, a robotic arm was meticulously extracting fluid from a tray of petri dishes with a speed and precision that no human hand could match. It looked like a scene from a science fiction movie. It looked like NASA. It looked like money. "My God," Linda whispered. It is a factory." "It is a Level 4 biolaboratory," Sterling corrected, looking down with satisfaction. "And it is beautiful, Ariel. The automation on the extraction line is new, is it not?" "Installed it last month," I said. "Increased yield by 40%. Preston was not looking at the robots. He was looking at the scale of it. He was looking at the walls, realizing that the shipping containers were just a shell, a facade hiding a massive subterranean complex that must have cost a fortune to build. "You built this?" Preston asked. His voice was hollow. "With what money?" "The 40,000 from Grandma." "Grandma gave me the start," I said. "But I built this with patents. Preston, I synthesized my first protein sequence 6 months after I moved here. I licensed it to the military for $2 million. I reinvested every penny, then I synthesized the next one, and the next one." I turned to face him. "You thought I was playing in the dirt," I said. "You thought I was a failure because I did not drive a Mercedes or wear a Rolex. But while you were gambling with Dad's money, I was building an empire." Preston turned slowly to look at me. The arrogance was gone. The condescension was gone. In their place was a naked, hungry greed that was far uglier. He looked at the lab. Then he looked at the ceiling. Imagining the gold-laden rock Elias had found outside, he did the math in his head. The gold, the contracts, the $50 million sitting in Sterling's briefcase. "The debt," Preston whispered. A smile began to creep onto his face. It was a terrifying, manic smile. "The family debt." "What about it?" I asked. "You owe the estate," Preston said, his voice gaining strength. "You owe the family. And this, all of this, it is on family land. It was built during the period of the loan." He laughed. It was a wet, breathless sound. "Do you realize what this means?" "Linda," Preston grabbed his mother's shoulders. "We are not selling to the landfill. We are not selling anything." He turned to Sterling, puffed out his chest, and adjusted his tie. "Dr. Sterling," Preston said, "I am afraid there will be no contract signing today. As the legal representative of the estate that holds the lien on this property and all its improvements, I am freezing all assets immediately." Sterling looked at him with mild annoyance. "Young man, you are testing my patience." "I am protecting my interests," Preston shouted. He swept his arm across the view of the lab. "This is community property. She used family funds to build it. That makes the family a majority shareholder. If you want to sign a deal, you sign it with me, and the price just went up to $100 million. I watched him. I watched the greed consume him completely. He had forgotten about the police. He had forgotten about the loan sharks. He saw a lifeline that was made of solid gold, and he was grabbing it with both hands. He had no idea that the lifeline was actually a noose. "You are claiming ownership," I asked softly. "I am claiming everything," Preston hissed, leaning into my face. "The gold outside, the lab inside, the contracts. It is all mine. Ariel, it is all the Winslow legacy, and you are just the employee who kept the lights on." I looked at Sterling. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. He knew the play. "Well," I said, stepping back, "if you are claiming ownership, Preston, then you better be ready to own everything that comes with it." "I am ready," he sneered. "Good," I said, "because you are going to need a lot of lawyers." The silence that followed Preston's declaration of ownership was not the silence of submission. It was the silence of a vacuum before an explosion. The air in the observation deck was cool and recycled, scrubbed of all impurities. But the tension radiating from my brother was toxic enough to set off the hazardous material alarms. He stood there, chest heaving, his eyes darting between the gleaming bioreactors below and the face of Dr. Sterling, trying to physically inhabit the space of a billionaire industrialist. He believed, truly believed, that by shouting "mine" loud enough, the laws of property and commerce would bend to his will. But before I could dismantle his delusion with the binder locked in my safe, the heavy steel door behind us slammed open. It did not slide. It was forced. We all spun around. Elias Thorne stood in the doorway. The county surveyor had lost his hat. His gray hair was standing up in wild tufts, matted with sweat and red dust. His khaki vest was smeared with dark streaks of grease and mud, and he was breathing hard, his chest rattling with the effort of running through the facility. In his hands, he clutched the core sample tray as if it were a holy relic. "Mr. Thorne," Preston snapped, annoyed at the interruption of his power play. "We are in the middle of a high-level negotiation. I told you to wait outside." Elias ignored him. He ignored Linda, who shrank back against the wall to avoid the dust he was shedding. He ignored the armed bodyguard and the billionaire CEO. He walked straight up to the glass wall, held the tray up to the high-intensity overhead lights, and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "It is not a septic tank," Elias wheezed. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated with the kind of adrenaline usually reserved for plane crash survivors. "And it is not just rock." He looked at me. His face flushed a deep, violent red. "I ran the chemical reagent test 3 times, Elias shouted, his voice echoing off the glass. 3 times, because I thought the spectroscope was broken. I thought the heat had fried the sensors. But it is not broken. The reagents turned purple instantly. Instantly." "What are you babbling about?" Preston demanded, stepping forward. "What turns purple?" "The gold." Elias yelled. The word hung in the air, vibrating like a struck bell. "Gold," Preston repeated. The annoyance vanished from his face, replaced by a blank, stunned look. "Not just gold," Elias continued, the words tumbling out of him in a frantic rush. "If it were just gold, that would be one thing. But this is a telluride matrix, calaverite, sylvanite. I have not seen a concentration like this since the history books about the 1890s. The density scans were off the charts because the metal is not scattered in flakes. It is a solid vein. It is a chimney structure pushing up right through the rhyolite." He thrust the tray toward Preston. "Look at the silver streaks," Elias commanded. "That is tellurium. Do you know what tellurium is worth right now? It is a critical component for cadmium telluride solar panels. It is used in next-generation semiconductors. It is rarer than platinum in the Earth's crust. And you have... My God, based on the seismic resonance, you have a vertical load that could be 200 meters deep." Preston looked at the dirt. He looked at the dull, yellowish glint of the gold and the metallic luster of the silver-gray mineral. "Tellurium," Preston whispered. He tasted the word. "Solar panels. Chips. It is strategic, Elias said, wiping spittle from his mouth. The Department of Energy lists this as a critical mineral, a deposit of this size. In the continental United States, you are not talking about a mine, son. You are talking about a national security asset. Preston's eyes changed. I had watched my brother's eyes my whole life. I had seen them glitter with envy when I got good grades. I had seen them darken with malice when he lied to our father. But I had never seen them look like this. They lit up. It was literal. The pupils seemed to expand, swallowing the iris, fueled by a rush of dopamine so potent it would have killed a lesser addict. The fear of the loan sharks, the terror of the FBI, the shame of his bankruptcy, it all evaporated in a single millisecond. The logic of the landfill was dead. The logic of the reptile farm was dead. Preston Winslow was no longer looking at a foreclosure. He was looking at a kingdom. He turned slowly to look at Linda. A slow, terrifying grin spread across his face, stretching the skin until it looked like a mask that didn't quite fit. "Did you hear that?" "Mother," Preston said softly. "Gold, strategic minerals, national security. Gold," Linda gasped. She took a step toward the tray. Her earlier revulsion at the dirt forgotten, she reached out a manicured hand to hover over the sample. "Real gold, like jewelry." "Better than jewelry," Preston said. "Industrial gold, tech gold, the kind of gold that makes you a kingmaker." He laughed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated release. He spun around in a circle, taking in the laboratory, the glass, the desert beyond the walls. "I knew it," Preston breathed. "I knew Dad did not just leave us a pile of sand. He knew. He must have known that old fox. He hid the family fortune right here, under the nose of the IRS, waiting for someone smart enough to find it." He turned to me. The transformation was absolute. The snarling, bullying creditor was gone. In his place stood the benevolent patriarch, the loving brother, the partner. It was a performance so sudden and so grotesque that I felt bile rise in my throat. He walked over to me. He did not invade my space this time. He approached me with open arms, his palms up in a gesture of peace. "Daisy," he said, his voice dripping with a sickening, sugary warmth. I stared at him. "My name is Ariel," he blinked, waving his hand dismissively. "Daisy, Ariel, it is just a name, sweetie. The point is, look at this. Look at what we found." He reached out and placed his hands on my shoulders. I felt the heat of his palms through my shirt. I fought the urge to break his fingers. "I think we got off on the wrong foot this morning," Preston said, gazing into my eyes with a sincerity that was 100% manufactured. "I was stressed. You were defensive. It is understandable. Families fight. It happens. But we cannot let a little squabble get in the way of destiny." "Destiny," I repeated flatly. "The legacy," Preston said. "Dad's legacy. He left this to us, to the Winslows. He wanted us to work together. That is why he gave you the seed money. And that is why he put me in charge of the trust. He knew you had the scientific mind to hold the fort, and he knew I had the business acumen to monetize it when the time was right." He squeezed my shoulders. "And the time is right, Ariel. Do you see? We do not have to sell to the landfill. We do not have to evict you. We can pivot. We can be partners." "Partners?" I said. "Managing partners," Preston corrected quickly. "Obviously. The trust holds the title, so I will handle the heavy lifting. I will handle the permits, the mining rights, the EPA filings. I will deal with the investors. You can keep your little lab down there. In fact, we can expand it. We can make it the R&D division of Winslow Mining and Biotech. How does that sound?" He looked over his shoulder at Dr. Sterling. "Dr. Sterling," Preston said, his voice booming with newfound confidence. "You can tear up that $50 million offer. It is insultingly low. If you want access to Winslow resources, we are going to need to restructure the deal. We are talking equity now. We are talking a joint venture with the mine." Sterling stared at him. The CEO of Orion Pharma had negotiated with heads of state, warlords, and cartel leaders to get medicines into conflict zones. He had seen every species of parasite the human race had to offer, but the look he gave Preston suggested he had found a new, particularly slimy variety. "Mr. Winslow," Sterling said, his voice icy, "I'm looking at a man who, 5 minutes ago, did not know the difference between a peptide and a pebble. You are not a partner. You are a biological contaminant in this room." Preston's smile did not waver. He was immune to insults now. He was armored in gold. "You are negotiating hard," Preston chuckled. "I respect that. But you are forgetting who holds the deed. This is my land. This is my gold. And this," he gestured to me, "is my sister, and blood is thicker than contracts. Right, Ariel?" He looked back at me, his eyes pleading, threatening, and cajoling all at once. "Come on, sis," he whispered. "Do not be difficult. Think about the debt. Think about the fraud charges I could bring up regarding the loan. We can make all that go away. Just nod. Just say we are a team. We will be billionaires. The Winslows will rule Nevada." I looked at him. I looked at the sweat on his upper lip. I looked at the desperation hidden beneath the greed. He was drowning, and he thought he had just found a life raft made of solid gold. He thought he could gaslight me, erase 5 years of abandonment and ridicule with one promise of shared wealth. He thought I was the same girl who used to cry when he made fun of my rock collection. A sound bubbled up in my chest. It started low, a rumble in my throat. I tried to suppress it, but the sheer absurdity of the moment was too much. It broke free. I laughed. It was not a warm laugh. It was not a happy laugh. It was a cold, sharp sound that echoed off the steel walls and the glass partitions. It sounded like ice cracking on a frozen lake. Preston's smile faltered. "Ariel?" I laughed harder. I stepped back, shaking his hands off my shoulders as if they were covered in slime. I looked at the core sample in Elias's hands, the beautiful, shimmering proof of my father's genius, and then I looked at the man who thought he could steal it. "Oh, Preston," I said, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye. "You really think it is that simple?" "It is that simple," Preston insisted, though his voice was edging back toward panic. "We own the land. We own the minerals. That is the law." "The law," I repeated, savoring the word. "You are right, brother. The law is a beautiful, precise thing, but you are making a very dangerous assumption." "What assumption?" Preston demanded. "You are assuming," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the silent room, "that the dirt and the gold are the same thing." "They are the same thing," Preston shouted. "It is in the ground. I own the ground." I stopped laughing. My face went slack, returning to the mask of the predator I had become in the desert. "Mr. Thorne," I said, turning to the surveyor, "thank you for the analysis. It confirms my own data from 3 years ago." "You knew?" Elias asked, his eyebrows shooting up. "Of course I knew," I said. "Why do you think I have 24-hour armed security and a perimeter fence?" I turned back to Preston. "You want to manage the mine. Preston," I asked, "you want to be a tycoon?" "I am going to be," Preston snarled. "And you are going to help me, or I will bury you under so many lawsuits you will never see the sun again." "Okay," I said. "Let us talk about ownership." I walked over to the console where I had left the rucksack. I did not open it yet. I just rested my hand on the canvas. "You see, Preston," I said, "when you spend your life looking at the surface, you miss the details, and the devil is always in the details." "Stop talking in riddles," Linda screamed. "We are rich, just admit it." "You are right, Linda," I said. "Someone is rich, insanely rich. But before you order the champagne, there is one more document we need to review." Preston looked at the bag. He looked at my hand. A flicker of doubt crossed his face, the instinct of a gambler who realizes the deck might be cold. "What document?" Preston asked. "The one that tells you who actually owns the hole you are standing in," I said. I unzipped the bag. Preston did not wait for my answer. He did not wait for Doctor Sterling to stop looking at him with undisguised contempt. He did not wait for the dust to settle from the revelation that lay on the metal tray. He did what he always did when he smelled an opportunity to bully his way into a fortune. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed his legal team in Las Vegas. "Cancel the auction," Preston barked into the phone. Turning his back to me, "I said cancel it, with prejudice. Pull the listing. Tell the waste management buyers to go find another dump. No, I do not care about the cancellation fee. Just pay it." He paced the length of the observation deck, his shoes squeaking on the pristine white floor. The sound was irritating, like a rodent scratching inside a wall. "Draft a new motion," Preston commanded, his voice rising with manic energy. "Emergency petition for conservatorship and direct asset seizure. We are pivoting from liquidation to acquisition. Yes, acquisition. We are taking the whole entity, the land, the structures, the intellectual property, all of it." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end, then laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "On what grounds? On the grounds of fraud. You idiot. My sister has been sitting on a solvent. High-yield commercial enterprise while defaulting on a family debt. It is constructive fraud. It is bad faith. She hid assets during a bankruptcy negotiation. Yes, exactly. Write it up. I want it filed within the hour." He hung up the phone and shoved it back into his pocket. He turned to face me, his chest heaving, his eyes bright with the fever of absolute greed. He looked like a man who had just pushed all his chips into the center of the table, convinced he held 4 aces. "You heard that," Preston said, stepping closer to me. "The game has changed. Ariel, we are not selling the farm anymore. We are taking it." "Taking it," I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. "You think a judge is going to grant you ownership of a multi-million-dollar laboratory because of a disputed $800,000 debt?" "It is not disputed," Preston snapped. "It is documented. And now, thanks to your little tour, I have proof of criminal intent." He gestured wildly at the bioreactors below us. "Look at this place," he said. "You have contracts worth $50 million pending. You have government grants. You have a facility that looks like it belongs in a sci-fi movie. You are rich, Ariel. You have been rich for years. And yet, when I came to you asking for repayment of the loan Dad gave you, you pleaded poverty. You claimed insolvency." "I claimed nothing," I said calmly. "I told you I did not owe you the money." "Semantics," Preston yelled. "In the eyes of the court, you are a debtor who concealed massive assets to avoid paying a creditor. That is fraud. That is a felony. I could have the sheriff arrest you right now." Linda stepped forward, emboldened by her son's aggression. She smoothed her wind-blown hair and adopted the look of a disappointed matriarch. "He is right, Ariel," Linda said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You lied to us. You let us worry about the estate's finances while you were sitting on a gold mine, literally and figuratively. It is shameful. Your father would be devastated to know you were hoarding wealth while the family struggled." "Struggled?" I asked, looking at her diamond earrings. "Is that what you call it, struggling in a penthouse?" "We have expenses," Linda shrilled. "And Preston has debts that this operation could have paid off years ago." Preston stepped between us, holding up a hand. He was the deal-maker now, the closer. "Here is the reality, Ariel," Preston said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I have you on the forgery. I mean, the loan default. I have you on asset concealment. And now, I have you on the mineral rights. If I file this motion, the court will freeze everything. They will lock the doors to this lab. They will seize your computers. They will halt your contracts, your deal with Dr. Sterling dead, your government grants suspended. I will tie you up in litigation for 5 years. I will bleed you dry with legal fees until you are begging for mercy." He paused to let the threat sink in. He thought he was terrifying. He thought he was the storm. He did not realize he was just the wind rattling the shutters. But, Preston continued, smiling that shark-like smile again, it does not have to be that way. We are family. I do not want to see my little sister in an orange jumpsuit. You are too kind, I said dryly. I am pragmatic, Preston said. So here is the offer. A one-time, non-negotiable offer. You sign a transfer of management rights today. You appoint me as the CEO of the new parent company, Winslow Mining and Biotech. You sign over 51% of the equity in the lab and 100% of the mineral rights to the family trust. And in exchange, I asked. In exchange, Preston said, spreading his hands wide. I do not send you to prison. I drop the lawsuit. I let you keep your job here. You can stay in your lab. You can play with your snakes. You can be the chief science officer. I will handle the business. I will handle the money. And we will all be rich. He looked at me with an expectant expression, waiting for me to crumble. He expected gratitude. He expected relief. I looked past him to Elias Thorne. The surveyor was standing by the door, still holding the tray of gold-flecked earth. His face was pale beneath the grime. He knew the law better than Preston did. He knew exactly how dangerous this conversation was. Mr. Thorne, I said, ignoring Preston for a moment. You heard all that. I heard it, Elias grunted. Sounds like blackmail to me. It is a settlement offer, Preston shouted, spinning around. And you stay out of this, old man. You are here to measure dirt, not give legal opinions. Actually, Elias said, his voice hard and gravelly, measuring dirt involves legal opinions, and there is something you need to understand about Nevada land law before you start counting your billions. I know the law, Preston sneered. I am a lawyer. You are a probate lawyer from the city, Elias countered. This is mining country. The rules are different. Elias walked forward, placing the tray on a stainless steel table. He pointed a calloused finger at the core sample. This find, Elias said, changes the classification of the land when the value of the mineral deposit exceeds the surface value by a significant margin. The state requires a pause in any transfer of title. We have to determine the severance status. Severance status, Preston scoffed. What are you talking about? Split estates, Elias said. In the West, owning the surface does not always mean you own the minerals underneath. The rights can be severed, sold off, traded, if the mineral rights were separated from the surface deed at any point in the last 100 years. Then you can own the farm, but you do not own the gold. Preston rolled his eyes. He looked at Linda and laughed. Split estates, Preston mocked. Listen to him. He's trying to scare us. Look, Mr. Thorne, I ran a title search on this property before I filed the foreclosure. It is a clean deed. Fee simple absolute. That means we own it from the center of the earth to the sky. There are no severed rights. Dad bought this land in 1985 from a cattle rancher. He bought the whole package. Are you sure about that? Elias asked quietly. Because a deposit like this, people usually know about it. People usually protect it. Nobody knew about it, Preston yelled. That is the point. It was hidden. It was a secret. And now that we found it, it belongs to the deed holder. And since I'm seizing the deed, it belongs to me. He turned back to me, his patience exhausted. Enough stalling. Ariel, the offer is on the table. 51% and management control, or jail. Choose. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the desperate, hollow man who had spent his entire life trying to fill a void with money he had not earned. I saw the brother who had pushed me into the mud when we were children because he was afraid I would run faster than him. You really want the gold, I said softly. Of course I want the gold, Preston shouted. It is gold. Do not act like you are above it. You were sitting on it for 5 years. You probably planned to mine it yourself once you got the capital. I did, I admitted. I planned to use it to fund the research, to cure diseases, to clean up toxic waste. How noble, Preston sneered. And how boring. We are going to strip mine this hill. Ariel, we are going to bring in the heavy equipment. We are going to tear this place open and extract every ounce of tellurium and gold until there is nothing left but a crater, and with that money, we will buy power. Real power. He turned to Linda. Imagine it, Mom, Preston said, his voice breathless. We can buy the penthouse back. We can buy the estate in the Hamptons. We can pay off the Chicago loan and still have enough to buy a seat on the Senate. We will be untouchable. Linda's eyes were wide, reflecting the fantasy. And a boat, she added. Your father always promised me a yacht. 2 yachts, Preston promised. 1 for the Atlantic, 1 for the Pacific. He looked back at me. Last chance. Ariel, sign the deal, or I call the sheriff and tell him you are running a fraudulent enterprise. I took a deep breath. The air in the lab was cold, but I felt a warmth spreading through my chest. It was the warmth of the trap snapping shut. You are absolutely certain, I asked slowly, ensuring every word was clear for the security cameras recording this conversation, that you are seizing the land specifically because of the mineral value that is your primary motivation. It is my only motivation, Preston said. The lab is nice, sure, but the gold is the jackpot. I am taking the land to get the gold. Put that on the record if you want. I do not care. It is legal, it is smart, and it is happening. And you believe, I continued, that the ownership of the surface guarantees you the ownership of the subsurface assets. I know it does, Preston said. I checked the county records myself. The deed is unified. There are no liens, no severed rights, nothing. You check the county records, I repeated. I did, Preston said. Thoroughly. Did you check the state registry? I asked. Preston paused. A tiny crease appeared between his eyebrows. The state registry. The Nevada Division of Minerals, I said. They maintain a separate database for active commercial mining claims and severed rights transfers that occur through corporate entities. It does not always sync with the county tax assessor immediately, especially if the transfer was recent. Preston's confidence flickered. He looked at Elias. What is she talking about? Preston demanded. Elias did not answer. He was looking at me with a dawning expression of awe. He knew. Preston, I said, my voice hardening. You are right about one thing. Dad bought the land in 1985, and he bought the mineral rights with it. See? Preston shouted. I told you. But I cut him off. When I bought the land from the estate 5 years ago, or rather, when I bought the surface rights, I was very specific about the transaction. You bought the land, Preston said, his voice shaking slightly. You used Grandma's money to buy the land. I used Grandma's money to buy the surface, I corrected. The deed you are holding, the one you are trying to foreclose on, it is for the surface parcel only, agricultural zoning, grazing rights, residential occupancy. That is impossible, Preston stammered. The deed says fee simple. Read the addendum, I said. Page 4, paragraph 12. Subject to all prior reservations and exceptions of record. That is boilerplate, Preston yelled. That is standard language. It is, I agreed. Unless there is a prior reservation of record. I reached for the rucksack I had placed on the console. The sound of the zipper opening was loud in the quiet room. You see, Preston, I said, pulling out a document bound in a blue folder. Before I bought the land as Ariel Winslow, I created a company, a shell company, Artemis Mining Corporation. Preston went pale. And Artemis Mining Corporation, I continued, walking toward him with the document in my hand, approached the Winslow estate 5 years ago. You were the executor then, Preston, but you were busy. You were in Macau, gambling, so you gave power of attorney to your junior associate to handle minor asset liquidations. Preston's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a hook. I bought the mineral rights, I said. Separate from the land, I bought them for $5,000 because you and your team thought the land was worthless. I severed the estate. I own the gold. Preston, not Ariel Winslow the sister, but Artemis Mining Corporation. I slapped the folder onto the stainless steel table next to the core sample. And here's the kicker, I said, leaning in close so he could smell the coffee on my breath. Under Nevada law, the owner of the mineral estate is the dominant estate. That means I have the right to access my minerals by any means necessary. Preston stared at the folder. He looked like he was going to vomit. What does that mean? Linda whispered. What does dominant estate mean? It means, Elias Thorne said, his voice rumbling with suppressed laughter, that she can dig up your surface to get to her gold. If you seize the farm, you just own the crust. She owns the cream, and she can destroy the crust to get to the cream. You are lying, Preston whispered. You are bluffing. Open the folder, I said. Read it. Preston reached out a trembling hand. He opened the blue folder. He stared at the stamped, notarized, and recorded deed of severed mineral rights. He stared at the date. He stared at the signature of his own junior associate, authorizing the sale 5 years ago. He had sold the gold for $5,000, and now he was trying to steal the dirt to get it back. You, Preston choked. You set me up. I did not set you up, I said coldly. I just bet on your laziness, and you paid out. This is invalid, Preston screamed, throwing the folder across the room, papers scattered everywhere. I will contest it. It is self-dealing. You are the buyer and the beneficiary. Actually, Doctor, Sterling spoke up from the corner, his voice calm and amused. That is where you are wrong. Artemis Mining is not solely owned by Ariel. Preston spun around. What? Orion Pharma acquired a 49% stake in Artemis Mining 3 years ago, Sterling said, smiling. We funded the initial geological surveys. So if you want to contest that deed, Mr. Winslow, you are not just suing your sister, you are suing Orion Pharmaceuticals, and my legal team is, well, let us just say they are more expensive than yours. Preston stood in the center of the room. The gold was on the table, the lab was below him, the contracts were in the air, and he realized, with a crushing, suffocating clarity, that he owned absolutely nothing. He had come to seize a kingdom, and he had found out he was just the jester. You cannot do this, Preston whispered. Tears of rage were welling in his eyes. I promised the investors. I promised the Chicago group. The Chicago group? I asked. The ones who break kneecaps. Preston flinched. I suggest you call them, I said. Tell them their collateral just evaporated. No, Preston moaned. No, no, no. He looked at the document on the floor. He looked at the heavy steel door. He looked for a way out, but there was no way out. The trap was perfect, and I had not even played the ace yet. The papers from the blue folder were still settling on the floor, scattered like dry leaves. When I decided to turn the knife, Preston was hyperventilating, his chest rising and falling in short, sharp hitches as he tried to process the existence of Artemis Mining Corporation. He was grasping for loopholes, shouting about conflicts of interest and corporate veils, desperate to find a legal thread he could pull to unravel the tapestry I had woven. He did not understand yet. He thought this was a dispute about money. He did not realize it was a dispute about geography. I walked back to the console. The cracked iPad was still resting there, humming with the connection to the main server. I tapped the screen, swiping away the live camera feeds and bringing up the geological interface. You are not listening, Preston, I said, my voice cutting through his panicked rambling. You are arguing about corporate law. You need to be looking at property law. I hit the cast button. The massive monitor on the far wall of the observation deck, usually reserved for displaying protein folding simulations, flickered. The image of the bioreactors vanished, replaced by a high-resolution, three-dimensional topographical map of the Winslow estate. It was a wireframe model. The surface, the red dirt, the scrub brush, the hangar, the shipping containers was rendered in a dull, flat gray, but beneath that gray skin, the map glowed. A vibrant, pulsing vein of gold and purple ran through the earth like an artery, starting just a few meters below the surface and plunging deep into the crust. Look at the screen, I commanded. Preston stopped shouting. He turned. Linda, who was clutching her pearls as if they were life preservers, looked up. Even the bodyguard shifted his stance to see. "What is that?" Preston whispered. "That," I said, pointing to the glowing vein, "is the mineral estate, and the gray part on top, that is the surface estate." I tapped the tablet again. A document overlay appeared on the screen. It was the Certificate of Severed Mineral Rights, issued by the state of Nevada. Department of Minerals. It was stamped, dated, and irrevocable. 5 years ago, I began, speaking slowly, letting every word land with the weight of a stone. When I came out here, I did not just start digging holes. I went to the state archives. I pulled the original land patents from 1890, and I found something interesting. The original rancher who sold this land to Dad. He never consolidated the rights. They were floating, vulnerable. I walked toward the screen, my silhouette cast against the glowing map. I knew about the tellurium because Dad left me the seismic data, I said. But I knew you, Preston. I knew that eventually you would burn through your trust fund. I knew you would come for the land. So, I bought an insurance policy. You bought the rights from the estate, Preston rasped. You stole them. I purchased them, I corrected. Fair market value. At the time, the land was assessed as worthless scrub. The mineral rights were valued at $5,000. I paid $6,000. Just to be generous. $6,000? Preston choked out. You bought a billion-dollar mine for $6,000. I bought the potential of a mine, I said. And do you know who signed the sale order? Do you know whose signature is on the transfer deed? I swiped the tablet. The signature block zoomed in on the big screen. Authorized by Kevin D. Miller, Junior Associate, Winslow Legal Trust. Preston's knees seemed to buckle. He grabbed the back of a chair. Kevin, Preston whispered. You got Kevin to sign it. You were in Monaco for the Grand Prix, I reminded him. You left Kevin with power of attorney for nuisance assets. I sent over the offer. Kevin saw a pile of dirt in the desert and a check for $6,000. He thought he was getting a great deal for the firm. He signed it, notarized it, and filed it. It is done. Preston, it has been done for 5 years. The room was silent. The only sound was the hum of the servers and the ragged breathing of my brother. So what? Preston said, trying to regain his footing, though his voice was thin and reedy. So you own the gold. Fine. But I own the land. I own the surface. I will seize the surface today. I will evict you. I will lock the gates. And I will never let you step foot on this property to mine a single ounce of that gold. If I cannot have it, you cannot have it. I will hold the surface hostage until you agree to a 50-50 split. He looked at me with a spark of renewed defiance. It was the logic of a child if I cannot play with the toy. I will break it. I will put up a fence, Preston vowed, his eyes manic. I will hire armed guards. You will never get a drill rig past the front gate. You own the minerals. Good for you. They can stay in the ground forever. I looked at Elias Thorne. The surveyor was shaking his head, a look of genuine pity on his face. He really does not know. Does he? Elias asked me. He is a city lawyer, I said. He knows contracts. He does not know dirt. I turned back to Preston. Preston, I said softly, you are forgetting where we are. This is Nevada. This is the West. And out here, there is a legal doctrine called the dominant estate. I know what a dominant estate is, Preston snapped. It means... He trailed off, unsure. It means, I said, stepping closer to him, that the mineral estate is superior to the surface estate. The law recognizes that minerals are useless unless they can be extracted. Therefore, the owner of the mineral rights has the implied right to use as much of the surface as is reasonably necessary to extract those minerals. Preston blinked. Reasonably necessary. In open-pit mining, Doctor. Sterling interjected, his voice smooth and deadly. Reasonably necessary usually involves high explosives and excavators the size of apartment buildings. I nodded. Exactly. You see, Preston, if you seize the farm today, if you kick me out and take the title to the surface, you are legally purchasing the ceiling of my mine, and I have the right to tear that ceiling down. I tapped the tablet one last time. The screen changed to a simulation. It showed the property as it was now, and then it showed a projection of a standard open-pit extraction operation. On the screen, the hangar disappeared, the shipping containers disappeared, the scrub brush disappeared. In their place, a massive terraced crater opened up, consuming the entire 20 acres. If you take the land, I said, I will file a mining plan of operation with the Bureau of Land Management tomorrow. I will bring in the bulldozers. I will strip the topsoil. I will blast the bedrock. And I will turn your family legacy into a hole in the ground 300 feet deep. You cannot do that, Preston stammered. There are structures here. There is a house. They are impediments to extraction, I said coldly. Under the law, I am allowed to remove them. I do not even have to pay you for them, because you purchased the surface knowing or should have known that the mineral rights were severed. That is called due diligence. Preston, and you failed to do it. I took a step forward. He took a step back. So here is your future, I said, painting the picture for him. You seize the land, you pay the taxes on it, you pay the insurance, and in 6 months, I turn it into a crater. You will own a hole, Preston, a worthless, dusty hole. You will not get a dime of the gold revenue, because that belongs to Artemis Mining. But you will get the liability, you will get the dust complaints, you will get the noise violations. You will be the landlord of a disaster zone. I paused. Is that the asset you want to fight for? I asked. Is that what you want to tell the investors, that you secured the rights to a crater? Preston looked at the screen, where the simulation showed the virtual excavators chewing up the land. He looked at the core sample on the table, the gold mocking him with its shine. He realized then that he had walked into a trap so comprehensive, so absolute, that it defied his understanding of the world. He had thought power came from ownership of the land. He did not realize that power came from what lay beneath it. You would destroy the lab, Preston whispered. You would bulldoze your own work just to spite me. The lab is modular. I lied. It wasn't entirely true, but he didn't know that. I can pack the equipment in 48 hours. I can move the operation to a warehouse in Reno. But the gold stays here, and I will come back for it. It was the final bluff, backed by the ironclad weight of the law. Linda let out a low moan. It was a sound of pure despair. She had been doing the math in her head. No gold meant no yacht. No surface value meant no penthouse. And the looming threat of the Chicago group meant something far worse. Preston, Linda whimpered. Preston, fix this. But Preston could not fix it. He was frozen. His face had gone a color I had never seen on a living human being, a gray pasty white that looked like wet ash. The veins in his neck were standing out, pulsing with a rapid, terrified rhythm. He looked at the folder on the floor. He looked at me. You planned this, he croaked. For 5 years? I planned for survival, I said. You were the one who turned it into a war. I am ruined, Preston whispered. It wasn't an exclamation. It was a statement of fact. If I cannot leverage this asset, if I cannot show the investors a win. He swayed on his feet. The room seemed to tilt. Preston? Linda screamed. She lunged for him, but she was too late to catch him. Preston Winslow, the man who believed he was destined to rule the world, crumpled. His legs simply gave out. He slid down the side of the stainless steel table, knocking the tray of gold ore onto the floor with a deafening clang. He landed in a heap on the white tile, surrounded by the scattered dirt and the gleaming chunks of telluride he could never own. Linda fell to her knees beside him, sobbing. He is having a heart attack. Call an ambulance. Someone help him. Doctor, Sterling stepped forward, but he did not look concerned. He looked at the bodyguard. Check his pulse. Sterling ordered calmly. Though I suspect it is just a case of acute insolvency. The bodyguard knelt down, placing 2 fingers on Preston's neck. He is breathing. The bodyguard grunted. Just fainted. Shock. Probably. I stood over them. I looked down at my brother, unconscious on the floor of the empire he had tried to steal, and my stepmother weeping over his expensive suit. It should have felt triumphant. It should have felt like victory. But looking at them, I just felt a cold, clinical detachment. They were not family. They were not even enemies anymore. They were just obstacles that had been removed. "Get him up," I said to the bodyguard. "I want them off my property." "Wait," Elias Thorne said. The surveyor was looking at his tablet, which was still syncing data from the county database. "You cannot kick them out yet, Miss Winslow," Elias said. I frowned. "Why not?" "Because," Elias said, turning the screen toward me, "while you were giving your lecture on mining law, the county sheriff just updated the dispatch log. They are en route." "The sheriff?" Linda looked up, mascara running down her cheeks. "Oh, thank God. They can help us. They can stop this madness." "I do not think they are coming to help you, ma'am," Elias said grimly. "The dispatch code is not for a civil dispute. It is a federal assist warrant." "Federal?" I asked. "FBI," Elias said. Preston groaned on the floor, his eyes fluttering open. He had picked the worst possible moment to wake up. "Did you say FBI?" Preston whispered, his voice trembling. "I did," Elias said. I looked at Preston. The fear that had been simmering in his eyes since the helicopter landed finally boiled over. He tried to scramble backward, sliding on the polished floor, pushing himself away from the door as if he could phase through the wall. "They found me," Preston whimpered. "Oh God, they found me." "Who found you?" "Preston," I asked. "The wire," he gasped. "The transfer." I looked at Silas, my lawyer, who I knew was listening on the open line via the console. I had not called the FBI. Silas had not called the FBI. We were waiting to spring the trap legally. "I did not call them," I said. "Neither did I." "Doctor," Sterling said. Preston looked around the room, wild-eyed. "Then who?" he screamed. I looked at the folder on the floor. The fake promissory note was peeking out from under the table, the one with the forged signature. "You leveraged the asset," I said, realization dawning on me. "You did not just try to seize the farm today. You already borrowed against it, didn't you?" "You used the forged deed to get the loan from the Chicago group?" Preston did not answer. He buried his face in his hands and began to sob. He had committed wire fraud. He had used a forged federal document to secure a loan across state lines. And when the lender realized the collateral was contested, they didn't just send a collection agent, they sent a tip to the bureau. The sound of sirens cut through the heavy insulation of the lab. They were faint, but growing louder. "Well," I said, looking down at the mess on my floor, "it looks like the eviction is happening after all. Just not the one you planned." The sound of sirens penetrating the subterranean levels of my laboratory was the acoustic anomaly. The facility was designed to be soundproof, isolated from the world by feet of concrete and steel. For the wail of law enforcement to be audible down here, they had to be right on top of us. Preston heard it. The color that had returned to his face drained away instantly, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under heat lamps. He was still on the floor, propped up on one elbow, but the paralysis of shock was replaced by the frenetic energy of a trapped animal. His eyes darted around the room, locking onto the blue folder that lay scattered on the stainless steel table, the forged promissory note. The document he had slammed down with such arrogance at dawn was peeking out from the pile. That piece of paper was no longer his ticket to a fortune. It was a confession signed in ink. "No," Preston whispered. "They cannot find it. If they find it, I am done." He scrambled to his feet, his Italian leather shoes slipping on the polished tile. He lunged for the table. It was a desperate, uncoordinated movement, driven by pure reptilian panic. He grabbed the promissory note, his hands shaking so violently he nearly tore it in half just by picking it up. "I have to get rid of it," he muttered, his voice high and thin. I have to eat it. I have to flush it." He looked around for a shredder, a sink, a lighter, anything to destroy the physical evidence of his crime. Finding nothing, he raised the document to his mouth, his jaw unhinging like a snake preparing to swallow a meal whole. "Stop him, Doctor," Sterling said. The command was spoken softly, without urgency, the way one might order a waiter to refill a water glass. The bodyguard, a man whose stillness had been so absolute he seemed like part of the furniture, moved. It was a blur of motion. One moment he was standing by the door. The next, he was behind Preston. He did not tackle my brother. He simply reached out, clamped a hand the size of a catcher's mitt onto Preston's wrist, and squeezed. Preston screamed. It was a sharp, humiliating yelp. His fingers spasmed involuntarily, and the promissory note fluttered to the floor. The bodyguard kicked the paper away, sliding it across the tiles until it came to rest at the toe of my work boot. "Let me go," Preston shrieked, thrashing against the grip. "You have no right. This is my property. That is my personal property." "That is evidence. Preston," I said. I bent down and picked up the document. It felt flimsy in my hand. It was just a piece of paper, yet it carried the weight of 5 years of betrayal. "You really thought destroying this copy would save you?" I asked, looking at him with clinical detachment. "Do you think we are living in the 19th century? Do you think I did not scan this the moment you put it on my table this morning?" "It is real," Preston yelled, though the lie sounded hollow even to his own ears. "You signed it. You owe me." I walked back to the console. The cracked iPad was still live. "Silas just sent the file," I said. "He has been coordinating with the forensic document examiner in Chicago for the last hour, while you were measuring the drapes for your imaginary penthouse. My legal team was dissecting your graphics." I tapped the screen. The topographical map of the gold vein vanished from the main monitor. In its place appeared a split-screen image. On the left was the signature from the promissory note. On the right was the signature from the birthday card I had given our father a decade ago. "Look at the screen. Preston," I commanded. He stopped struggling, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked. The image zoomed in until the ink strokes looked like rivers. A red overlay appeared, tracing the geometry of the two signatures. "A 99.9% geometric match," I read from the report scrolling beneath the images. "Human beings do not sign their names identically twice. There is always variation. Muscle memory is fluid. But these are mathematically identical." I swiped the screen again. The image zoomed in further, down to the pixel level. "And here's the smoking gun," I said. "See that artifact on the curve of the W, that jagged edge that is consistent with a 300 dpi scan resolution, and see the faint halo around the ink that is compression noise. You did not even use a high-quality scanner. Preston, you used the office copier." "It proves nothing," Preston spat, though sweat was now pouring down his face in sheets. "It is circumstantial." "Is it?" I asked. "Because the metadata on the digital file you emailed to the county clerk to file the foreclosure motion, Silas pulled that too. The creation date of the underlying image file was yesterday. You forged a 5-year-old document yesterday afternoon, probably while drinking a martini." Linda let out a sob. She covered her face with her hands, rocking back and forth. She knew. She had always known he was sloppy, but she never thought he was stupid enough to leave a digital trail. "But forgery is a state crime," I said, my voice hardening. "You might get probation, you might get disbarred, but you wouldn't go to federal prison for 20 years. For that, you need something bigger." I tapped the screen one last time. A new document appeared. It was a complex web of wire transfers and collateral agreements, visualized as a flowchart. "Wire fraud," I said. "Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343. Preston went limp in the bodyguard's grip. "You were so desperate to pay off the Chicago group," I said. tracing the line on the screen with my finger. You knew they were going to hurt you. So, 3 days ago, you approached a secondary lender, a legitimate bank in Salt Lake City, and you took out an emergency bridge loan for $2 million. I needed liquidity, Preston whispered. And for collateral, I continued. You listed the Winslow estate assets, specifically, this property, but you listed it as unencumbered fee simple ownership. You pledged my land you did not own, land you had not foreclosed on, land with severed mineral rights you did not control as security for a federal bank loan. I turned to him. You sold what wasn't yours, across state lines, using electronic communications, I said. That is federal wire fraud, and because the value exceeds $1 million. The sentencing guidelines are severe. I was going to pay it back, Preston cried. Once I sold the land. Once I mined the gold. It was just a bridge, I was going to fix it. You cannot fix a felony with a shovel, Preston, I said. The sound of the sirens stopped, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots on the metal stairs leading down to the lab. The secure door at the end of the corridor, the one I had walked through earlier, was breached. There was no code entered this time. There was a hydraulic ram. Boom! The sound reverberated through the facility. Linda screamed. Federal agents! A voice boomed from the corridor. FBI, hands in the air. Nobody move. A team of 6 agents in tactical gear swept into the observation deck. They moved with the precise, aggressive choreography of a raid. Rifles were raised, tactical lights cutting through the sterile white of the lab. Clear left. Clear right. Identify, an agent shouted, training his weapon on the bodyguard. Private security, the bodyguard said calmly, raising his empty hands slowly. Doctor. Arthur Sterling, Orion Pharma. We are non-combatants. The lead agent, a woman with a hard face and a windbreaker emblazoned with FBI, stepped forward. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on Preston. Preston Winslow, she barked. Preston nodded weakly. He looked like he was about to faint again. Preston Winslow, you are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft, the agent said. She holstered her weapon and pulled out a pair of zip ties. Turn around. Hands behind your back. The bodyguard released him. Preston slumped forward, almost falling into the agent's arms. She spun him around and cinched the plastic cuffs tight. The sound of the plastic ratcheting shut was the loudest noise in the room. You have the right to remain silent, the agent recited. Anything you say can and will be used against you. It was not me. The scream came from the corner. We all turned. Linda was standing up. She had dropped her handbag. Her face was a mask of terrified self-preservation. She pointed a trembling finger at her stepson, the boy she had coddled and spoiled for 30 years. It was him, Linda shrieked, her voice cracking. He did it all. I told him not to. I told him it was wrong. He forced me to go along with it. He said he would cut me out of the will if I didn't help him. Preston twisted his head around, staring at his mother in disbelief. Mom, he whispered, what are you doing? I am an old woman, Linda cried, looking at the FBI agent. I did not understand the paperwork. He is a lawyer. He manipulated me. He told me Ariel was stealing from us. I am a victim here. You have to believe me. You snake, Preston hissed. You drove the car. You helped me scan the signature. You picked out the card. Liar, Linda screamed. He is a pathological liar. Ask anyone I begged him to leave Ariel alone. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Ariel, tell them, Linda begged. Tell them I tried to stop him. Tell them I defended you. I looked at her. I remembered the way she had looked at my dirty hazmat suit this morning. I remembered the way she had called my home a squatter's den. I remembered 5 years of silence when I was eating instant noodles in a shipping container while she was drinking champagne in Manhattan. Officer, I said to the lead agent, I believe you will want to hear this. I picked up the iPad again. What is this? The agent asked. My security system records audio within the hangar and the perimeter. I said, This is a recording from yesterday afternoon, a phone call between Preston and Linda, intercepted by the microphone on Preston's car when he pulled up to the gate earlier to scout the property. He had the window down. I pressed play. The audio was crisp and clear, amplified by the lab's speakers. Linda's voice filled the room. "Make sure it looks real. Preston, if the signature looks shaky, trace it again." "We cannot have the judge asking questions." Preston's voice. "It is fine, Mom. It is a perfect match." Linda's voice. "And the emotional angle, we need to make sure she looks unstable. Tell the surveyor she is hoarding trash. If we can get her declared incompetent, the conservatorship is automatic. I want that land. Preston, I am not losing the Hamptons house because you made bad bets. Crush her." The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Linda stood frozen, her mouth open, her finger still pointing at Preston. The lie died in her throat. She looked at the FBI agent, then at Preston, and finally at me. "Crush her," I repeated softly. Linda stammered. That was conspiracy to commit fraud," the FBI agent finished. She signaled to her partner. "Cuff her too." "No," Linda screamed, as the agent approached her. "Do not touch me. This is a Chanel suit. You cannot arrest me. I am Linda Winslow." "You have the right to remain silent," the agent said, spinning her around and securing her wrists. "I suggest you use it." Preston looked at his mother being manhandled. He did not look angry anymore. He looked broken. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the dust and sweat. "Ariel," he whispered, "please, we are family." I looked at the brother who had tried to bury me. I looked at the mother who had tried to erase me. And then I looked at the core sample of gold sitting on the table, the legacy my father had actually left me. "No, Preston," I said, my voice steady and cold. "We were never family. We were just a business arrangement that went bad, and I am finally closing the account." The agents began to march them out. Preston stumbled, his head hanging low. Linda was still wailing about her reputation and her clothes. "Wait," I said. The agent paused, holding Preston by the arm. "Take this with you," I said. I picked up the forged promissory note from the table. I walked over and tucked it into Preston's breast pocket, right next to his silk handkerchief. "A souvenir," I said. "So you never forget what it cost you." Preston looked at me one last time. There was no hate in his eyes, just the terrifying realization that he had underestimated the one person in the world he should have feared the most. The heavy steel doors closed behind them, leaving only the echo of their ruin. The dust settled behind the convoy of black government SUVs as they navigated the rutted access road back toward the highway. It was a slow procession, almost funereal in its pacing. From where I stood on the metal grating of the observation deck, I watched the vehicles disappear into the shimmering heat haze of the Nevada afternoon. Preston Winslow was sitting in the back of the second vehicle, his wrists bound in plastic, his Italian suit ruined by sweat and the indignity of his arrest. The federal agents had been thorough. They had cataloged his crimes with a terrifying efficiency: wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, conspiracy to defraud a financial institution. The lead agent had mentioned the federal sentencing guidelines as she shoved him into the car. For the amount of money involved, $2 million obtained through fraudulent means across state lines, Preston was looking at a mandatory minimum. With the enhancements for targeting a family member and abusing his position as an executor, he would be lucky to see the outside of a prison cell in 20 years. And he would not be going to a minimum security camp. He had defrauded the Chicago group. He had defrauded a federal bank. He was going to a place where his manicure and his vocabulary would offer him no protection. Linda was in the third car. Her fate was perhaps less structurally confined, but equally devastating. As a co-conspirator caught on tape, she was facing charges of aiding and abetting, but the real punishment was financial. The FBI had already initiated a freezing order on the Winslow Family Trust. the assets she relied on to maintain her facade of high society. The penthouse, the country club memberships, the leased luxury cars were now evidence. By the time the lawyers and the forensic accountants were done picking through the carcass of the estate, she would be left with nothing. She would lose her social standing, her friends, and her future. She was leaving my property as a destitute woman who would likely spend her twilight years relying on the state welfare she had so viciously mocked me for supposedly using. It was a total, absolute dismantle, and I felt a profound, quiet sense of closure. "Well," a gravelly voice spoke from behind me, "that was one hell of a morning." I turned. Elias Thorne was still standing by the stainless steel table, wiping his hands on a rag. He had carefully placed the core sample back into its protective casing, treating it with the reverence a religious man might show a relic. "I apologize for the drama, Mr. Thorne," I said. "I know you just came here to survey the land." Elias chuckled, a dry sound like sandpaper on wood. He walked over to the window and looked out at the empty road. "I have been surveying land in this county for 40 years, Miss Winslow," Elias said. "I have seen boundary disputes, water rights wars, and shotgun standoffs, but I have never seen a woman take down a sophisticated financial criminal using nothing but a geology map and a fake reptile farm." He turned to me, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You have a hell of a poker face, kid." "I learned from the best," I said, thinking of my father. Elias tapped the case containing the gold and tellurium core. "So, what is the plan? Do I need to call the state mining inspector if you are going to open a pit here? We need to start the environmental impact studies immediately. A mine this size changes the tax bracket significantly." I looked down at the lab floor below. My scientists were already getting back to work. The centrifuges were spinning, the robotic arms were pipetting, the work of saving lives was resuming as if the interruption had never happened. "No," I said firmly. "No mine." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me, you are sitting on a deposit worth hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions, and it is going to stay right where it is," I said. "Buried." Elias looked confused. "You are just going to leave it in the ground." "Mr. Thorne," I said, walking over to the railing, "if I mine this land, I destroy the surface, I destroy the habitat for the scorpions and the snakes. I destroy the microbial ecosystem in the aquifer that I am using to clean up toxic waste. The biological value of this land, the cures we are finding, the technology we are building is worth infinitely more in the long run than a one-time cash out of metal." I looked at him. "Besides," I added, "gold is heavy, it is dirty, and it makes people crazy. Look what it did to my brother. I do not need the gold to be rich. I just needed the gold to prove I owned the land." Elias stared at me for a long moment, studying my face. Then he smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. "Strategic Mineral Reserve," Elias said, nodding slowly. "What? If you classify the deposit as a strategic reserve held for future national security needs, but choose not to exploit it for environmental reasons," Elias explained, his surveyor's brain working the angles. "I can file the assessment under the Conservation Easement Code. It protects the mineral rights from being challenged by third parties, but it taxes the land at a preservation rate rather than a commercial mining rate. It would save you about $400,000 a year in property taxes." I smiled. "That sounds perfect. Mr. Thorne?" "I will write it up that way," Elias said, picking up his gear. "You keep your lab, you keep your dirt, and the county gets to brag that we have the largest unmined tellurium reserve in the state. Everyone wins." He tipped his non-existent hat to me. "I will show myself out. Good luck, Ariel. Not that you need it," as Elias left. "Doctor." Sterling stepped forward. The billionaire CEO had been quietly observing the exchange, his arms crossed over his linen suit. He looked at the heavy steel door closing behind the surveyor, then turned to me. "You are a rare breed, Ariel," Sterling said. "Most people would have signed the mining contract before the dust settled." "I am not most people," I said. I am a scientist. I prefer sustainable yields over liquidation. Sterling nodded. He reached into his briefcase, the one that had remained handcuffed to his assistant's wrist throughout the entire standoff, and pulled out a thick document bound in leather. The acquisition contract, Sterling said, placing it on the table where the forged note had recently laid. $50 million up front, 12% royalties, and, per your request, a clause guaranteeing that Orion Pharma will never compel you to extract the mineral assets of the Red Rock property. I picked up a pen. It was a cheap ballpoint pen from the lab supply closet, the same kind I used to label test tubes. I did not need a gold fountain pen. I signed my name, Ariel Winslow. I dotted the I with a firm, simple dot. No hearts, no flourishes, just the mark of a woman who knew exactly who she was. Done, I said, sliding the contract back to him. Done, Sterling agreed. He shook my hand. The funds will be wired to your corporate account by close of business today. Welcome to the big leagues. Ariel. I have been in the big leagues. Arthur, I said. I just did not have the jersey. By the time Sterling and his team lifted off in their black helicopter, the sun was beginning to dip below the western ridge. The roar of the turbine faded, replaced once again by the profound, heavy silence of the desert. But the quality of the silence had changed. For 5 years. The silence had felt like a weight. It was the silence of hiding. It was the silence of a fugitive waiting to be found. Now. As I walked out of the hangar and onto the concrete porch of my living container, the silence felt like armor. It felt like peace. The heat was breaking. The sky was turning a bruised purple, streaked with veins of fire-orange colors that mirrored the hidden geology beneath my feet. I walked over to the small folding table I kept on the porch and poured myself a glass of red wine. It was a cheap bottle, one I had bought at the gas station 3 weeks ago, but tonight it tasted like nectar. I sat down in the old canvas chair, the one with the fraying armrest. I looked out at the yard. It was still ugly to the untrained eye. There were still piles of scrap metal. There were still rusted shipping containers. The fence was still topped with razor wire. But I no longer saw a scrapyard. I saw a fortress. I saw the laboratory humming beneath the earth, churning out miracles. I saw the scorpion tanks glowing under UV light. I saw the fungi eating poison and turning it into life. And I saw the gold, sleeping deep in the rock. A silent guardian that had saved me not by being spent, but by simply existing. My father had known. I raised my glass to the empty desert, to the jagged rocks of the dead zone, and to the ghost of the man who had taught me to look down when everyone else was looking up. Here is to you, Dad, I whispered. You told me to dig deep. You just didn't tell me I would have to bury the past to find the future. I took a sip of the wine. It was warm from the evening air. Preston and Linda were likely being processed at the Federal Detention Center in Las Vegas right now. They were trading their silk sheets for wool blankets. They were learning the hard way that value is not determined by what you wear or what you drive, but by what you build and what you protect. They had come here to strip me. They had come here to peel away what they thought was a facade of poverty to reveal the failure underneath. Instead, they had peeled away the camouflage and found a war machine. I set the glass down and leaned back, watching the first stars begin to prick the darkening sky. I was 32 years old. I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar biotech firm. I was the owner of a strategic mineral reserve, and I was alone in the middle of the desert. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel lonely. I felt sovereign. The wind picked up, rustling the sagebrush, whispering across the hard-packed earth. It sounded like applause. They wanted to rob me of my dirt because they thought it was cheap. In the end, they lost their whole lives because they didn't know that the most expensive thing on this land wasn't the gold. It was the woman standing on it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was a long journey from that first terrifying morning with the eviction notice to this quiet sunset. But justice is a dish best served with a side of cold, hard facts. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a big city, a quiet farm, or somewhere in between? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one to connect with you. And if you enjoyed seeing a greedy brother and a wicked stepmother get exactly what they deserved, please hit that like button, subscribe to Family Revenge Stories, and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need a reminder that sometimes the good guys actually win. See you in the next one.